Welcome in, motherfuckers. It's time for round 2 of Cringe. Cringe Fest. If you can read the title, we all know why we're here. The debate should be starting in approximately 15 minutes-ish. I think the live coverage starts in a minute or so. Yeah, it's going to be a good time. We're going to watch. We'll comment if we have moments where it's not as heated to say things about what we feel. And, yeah. At the end, I'll give a little recap of what I think. The first debate was yesterday. I don't really feel like there was much of a winner or a loser necessarily in yesterday's debate, so we'll see if today's debate can change my mind on that, but yeah. And this is coming from more of a, I guess my perspective would be considered more of like a left-leaning perspective, so be through the eyes of like a left-leaning lens. And we'll be joined today by the 13 Army, who I'm going to hop on a call with. And he's more liberal, so generally liberal leaning. So yeah, so we'll get some good perspective here. We'll just hop. Hello.
Hello.
How goes?
It's going. I am getting a little frustrated.
How so?
Actually, I think I figured it out. I'm getting frustrated. I'm trying to automate our smelters.
Yep.
1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And it's like, it's going.
It's going?
It's going.
Can you speaky again?
Hello? Hello?
Sorry, I'm just adjusting your volume. I think I need to max your volume for me to hear you well. I'm going to turn down the desktop audio again.
That was down to 5, and then it was down to 20.
There we go. That should be better. Hopefully. Cool. La-dee-da. Intriguing.
That's not doing what I want to. Well, if I take it out one more.
Bonk. Okay, I'm
Like
screen
that.
sharing my my thing for the election stuff.
Okay.
Debate won't start till 7, but they're doing commentary on it right now, so.
Okay.
Cool. Anyways, Yaz, you're trying to figure out some smelter shit?
Yeah.
Fuck.
I'm trying to automate our smelter.
Oh, interesting. If I minimize the screen, it doesn't like it. If I minimize the screen that I'm streaming, then it stops the stream.
Okay.
Intriguing. Like in Discord specifically. Bonk. Wee.
Yeah, I think I have to go underneath that. Where's my bucket of water?
Oh,
Yeah. Fuck. Okay.
fuck.
The issue is where I think the issue is where I'm trying to automate it.
Oh yeah, how so?
I was trying to keep it compact, but I think it's actually just fucking me more than it's helping me.
Oh, you need to just make it a big spread out motherfucker.
Well, not like big, but I need to make it less compact than what it is. Because right now
Mm-hmm.
it's really fucking compact. Which doesn't sound like a bad idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
But apparently it fucking is.
Rip.
Okay. Need that torch again too.
Very good. How's the stream been, my dude?
Pretty quiet. Pretty chill.
Pretty chill. Very good.
I think if I do it over here, that might be better. But if maybe I need to find a different place for our nether cape. But the problem is ah! The problem is that
Oh
I'm trying to
Jesus. Here, one
fucking
second.
connect. Oh, sorry.
So that's okay. I got my volume is a little fucked right now. I gotta fix it. Right, speaky again?
Hello?
Okay, I think that's better. I think I was just ear raping chat.
Oh, fair enough. The problem is that I'm gonna have to try and link all three of these fucking smelters up, including, or sorry, all four, including this one over here. I'm gonna have to try and link them all up with like some sort of like infinite lava generator, which like theoretically I could just copy and paste what I did for the infinite power source.
Yeah.
I just don't have access to like the fucking oh sorry. What are they called? What are they called? I guess I do have the transfer. That's what I need. I need the transfer. I don't have access to the fluid transfer nodes yet.
Ah, makes
Once
sense.
once I have access to those, my whole life just becomes so much more simpler because then I can just automate fucking putting fluid directly into these smelters instead of having to run cables and fucking all that shit. And then I found a way where I can automatically smelt things, but the problem is that those things are going to go directly into the filing cabinets, which is like fine, I guess, but it's not what I wanted. I want them to go into the fucking storage request table so that that can auto sort it, right?
Jesus.
But it's not fucking doing that. It's just not working for some reason. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll just go fuck myself, which like really throws a wrench in my plans because I can like auto craft amber, and if I
Yeah.
auto craft the amber, then I can auto feed that amber into the smelters. Then it can smelt down into the fucking ingots, and then those ingots would feed back into the fucking storage request table, which
Yeah.
would auto sort itself, which would be ideal. That would be nice, but it's not fucking doing that, and I'm like, fuck you.
The struggle is real, son.
It is so goddamn triggering.
Canadians explaining why he's even asking them.
Why is that routing there?
I guess I'll turn off my music. And I'll disconnect from the server. Cancel, quit game. Oh, stop the server, close that. Take this all the way into, actually, let's do this first.
Can I really not change my internet settings? That is weird.
Alright, and now let's go over here into this. Is it a federal election debate?
Yep.
Federal Leaders Debate 2021.
Are you gonna watch it yourself, like live as well?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. I'm watching the. I've got the global news one open again. I'm gonna try them again and see, but
there's two global news ones.
There's.
Oh, that says that. Okay, no, that's okay. There's only one that says live now. The other one was the one from yesterday.
Yesterday, yeah.
Gravel throwing incident at Justin Trudeau. Would you say that that was kind of a moment where a line was crossed, and would you say that's seen largely as acceptable or not acceptable?
Well, usually we like to see.
So they're doing commentary right now. I don't know if did you already start watching it?
I did.
Yeah. Debate should be starting in like 5 minutes though, so I'll just
probably
watch this.
Protests with very strong emotion on any number of topics in the last few years. So I think it's perhaps a mistake to focus too much on one point in time and some gravel, as reprehensible as that was.
Let's talk about last night's performances during the French debate. In your opinion, who came out on top and who lost last night? Daryl, let's go to you first.
Well, I don't think anybody really came out on top. I mean, we did do some analysis for Global News last night in terms of looking at traffic on social media, and what we did see was that Justin Trudeau certainly got the most mentions. But in terms of the emotions of the debate, Blanchette tended to do a little bit better. So it was kind of a mixed bag. The most important thing that happened last night was that Aaron O'Toole was actually able to stand on that stage and compete with the other leaders, and walked away basically with his campaign intact. And what we know, based on looking at public opinion through the course of this election campaign, the momentum is on the side of the Conservative Party and the New Democrats. So both of those leaders were able to walk away without spoiling their momentum. Justin Trudeau maybe got back a little bit more on the stage than he was before, but certainly hasn't turned things around, I would say, for his campaign yet.
Yeah, Daryl, we do have the results of another Ipsos poll that we want to touch on as well, and this one pertains to undecided voters. So according to the data, about 13% of the population has yet to decide who they'll be casting their ballot for on September 20th. 2/3 of those individuals are women. The top issues at hand are healthcare and the pandemic. Not surprising. That is in line with most Canadians. Affordability and the cost of living are also of importance. And when it comes to why these voters are still undecided, about half say they don't like any of the options. So, Daryl, is the current percentage of undecided voters comparable to previous elections? And how can these individuals influence the result?
Yeah, it is pretty typical of previous elections, but one of the other things that pops out from the survey results is these people are also fearful about voting more than the Canadian population in terms of health risks associated with showing up at the voting booth. So I would say that
are you getting the feedback from me anymore?
Even one with high turnout, like the last two campaigns, when it was close to 70%, about 30% of the eligible voters didn't show up. I would say that these people are overrepresented within that category. And my sense is that some of the barriers that are created by the special way that we're going to be voting in this election campaign may even keep the voter turnout lower than it's been previously.
Okay. And you see the leaders there were about a minute and a half away from the start of the debate.
Oh yeah, they have curly
let's
fries.
touch on that number there, that a lot of people didn't seem to like any of their options. The likability factor.
What's up, amigo?
I'm trying to take off the fucking plastic they put my gravy in, and I poked a hole right into the styrofoam fucking...
That is not an uncommon answer in any electoral cycle. That is
what the fuck is that?
Famous person has said, voting is not about finding your soulmate. And I would add, it's not about going to
if I put this upside down,
a buffet restaurant and you only pick the things
there's already a hole in the bottom of my fucking styrofoam thing, so there's no point in taking the lid off.
Of the party, of the platform, and of the leader.
So who do we have talking
does
right
leadership likability
I don't know, some
matter?
random
Yes,
people.
It does.
Okay,
however, performance and evidence of the of what's
some
happened
kind
in
of
the
political
past
commentators.
6 years since Mr. Trudeau.
Political commentators fucking suck. You know, that's technically what we're doing, but...
No, these ones fucking suck. You know, they were kind of downplaying a little bit, saying that they didn't like the gravel, like they didn't really care too much about the gravel incident with Trudeau. I think that's kind of disgusting.
Let's take another live look inside
I agree.
the debate.
Nobody's making a big enough deal
now.
about protesters like
So
literally
that's 30
being
seconds
violent
until
towards
this
our
debate
politicians.
starts. As our panelists
They just
mentioned,
completely
we'll have to
excuse
see
it, which is
how
really bad in
these
Alberta too. We get
performances
fucking
go
disgusting
tonight
here.
After last night's
True.
several
I think
fiery
I
moments,
saw
we'll have to see
something
if
on
some other ones develop tonight
on
as well.
Reddit
This
saying
time
that, like,
again, this
O'Toole,
debate in English, the first and last one
like,
of this election
told some of
campaign.
his staffers to do
Let's
that.
go to the debate now.
Yeah. I've also seen him like be pretty against it too, but I mean, it's possible. I think one of his staffers was involved.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was.
Yeah.
You had an option, sir. You could have said, I am not going to do it.
This was just scattering money around to build gazebos and fake
gazebos.
lakes. The one you bought, you can't build.
I'm really torn about having like a debate in English and a debate in French.
Don't try to paper over
why
what's
so?
happening in people's lives.
Given the fact that like we're a bilingual country and French is supposed to be our secondary language, so I feel like everyone in Canada should speak French.
It was always impossible.
It's very
You know?
Oh, because we're bilingual?
Yeah.
That's fair. It's probably like ideal if that's the case, right?
Live from Gatineau, Quebec, this is the 2021 Federal Leaders Debate. We're coming to you from the Grand Hall in the Canadian Museum of History on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. A place for Canadians to reflect on the country's past. But tonight, we are looking ahead to the future. Good evening, I'm Shachi Curl. I'm the president of the Angus Reid Institute.
Can our boy Jugmeat come out on top tonight?
Let's
find
welcome
out.
the party
I was a little
Justin Trudeau for the Liberal Party. Aaron O'Toole for the Conservative Party.
Yeah, nobody did well. It was very
Blanchet of the Bloc Québécois.
Pleasure.
Jagmeet Singh
seems that's the consensus with other people too. Everyone thinks nobody came out on top yesterday.
Welcome, leaders.
Good evening. Great to be here.
Tonight's event is being produced.
I'm hoping that the moderators will push back a little more, if not the political party leaders themselves.
CBC News, CTV News, and Global News. The debate is also offered in 10 other languages, including Cree, Inuktitut, Dene, as well as described video and ASL. 20,000 Canadians have weighed in telling us what they want to hear from the leaders, and 5 themes have emerged: leadership and accountability, climate change, reconciliation, affordability, and COVID recovery.
Sounds like the
Tonight,
same topics.
4 undecided journalists, rather 4 undecided voters and journalists, maybe the journalists are undecided as well, will be putting their questions directly to the leaders. And you leaders, you've agreed to tonight's rules and format. So before we begin, please answer the questions you're asked. Do not interrupt each other. I don't want to cut you off, but I will if I have to, okay? All right, let's get started. You will each get a different question, and you have 45 seconds to answer. You all have a countdown clock. The theme is leadership and accountability.
No opening statements.
Your speaking order has been determined by draw. And Mr. Singh, you are first. Hi, Mr. Singh.
Hi there.
I'm not surprised about that.
You are popular and you inspire many Canadians.
It's pretty annoying because it gives them an excuse to just like ignore the first question.
Of big promises, and when it comes to how you'll pay for it all, there's not a lot of details. Given this, how can Canadians know that you are really ready to lead?
Say good evening to everyone tuning in.
There is a serious question that people are asking themselves in this election. They're wondering who's going to pay the price of this pandemic and the recovery. And we do have bold plans about how we can invest in people. But we are the only party with a credible plan that will not put the burden on people, that will not cut the help that they need, unlike Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole, who voted against making the ultra-rich pay their fair share. We believe that billionaires should pay their fair share. We should end the loopholes and the offshore tax havens that mean billions of dollars are lost, that we are not able to invest in people. We want to put the burden on those that are at the very, very top so we can invest in the solutions that people need. Tackling the climate crisis, investing in housing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Singh. Next
That's
to
a
you,
good
Mr.
answer.
Trudeau. Because you wanted a new mandate, you plunged the country into an election even as the pandemic spurs thousands of new cases.
Here we go.
But over the last 18 months, opposition parties have largely stood with you, putting the nation above politics. Why aren't you doing the same? How can you justify an election at this time?
Thank you, Ms. Curl. I think, first of all, I want to thank Canadians for being here tonight and making an important choice, and also, quite frankly, for everything you've done over the past number of months to help get ourselves and our neighbours through this. Tonight, over the next couple of hours, you're going to hear some very, very different, very strong ideas that are radically different about how we're going to move forward through this pandemic to end it, how we're going to build back better. Those decisions are going to be taken by your government now, in the coming weeks, this fall, not a year from now, not 2 years from now.
Could it not have waited a few months, Mr. Trudeau?
I know you want to go harder and faster on vaccinations. I know you want to go harder and faster on climate change, and you get to choose exactly that in this election.
All right, that's time. Thank you. Mr. Blanchet, to you.
Non-answer again.
You deny that Quebec has problems with racism, yet you defend legislation such as Bills 96 and 21, which marginalize religious minorities,
Ooh, spicy question.
Anglophones, and allophones. Quebec is recognized as a distinct society, but for those outside the province, please help them understand why your party also supports these discriminatory laws.
The question seems to imply the answer you want. Those laws are not about discrimination. They are about the values of Quebec.
And yet
but they,
religious
oh man,
minorities,
that's such
sir,
a
cannot
slimy
progress
fucking
as they
answer.
wear their religious gear.
Quebec is not recognized as a distinct society. It's been recognized as a nation on June 16th.
Protecting one's
By
own
the
culture at
Parliament.
the expense of other people's cultures is completely fucked.
281 votes
Inexcusable.
said that Quebec is a nation, and everybody here seems to agree with that. No more distinct society, which never had any meaning anyway. Meaning, not meeting.
So again, why the discriminatory laws and your support for it, sir?
You may repeat as many
Quebec
times as you
isn't
want
a
that those
nation.
are discriminatory laws.
Look at
We
your
are saying
face.
that those are legitimate laws that apply on Quebec territory, and there seems to be people around here who will share this point of view, which is a gain by itself for Quebec.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blanchet.
Yep, complete dodge.
Ms. Paul, to you. For millions of voters, this is the climate change election. But at this critical time, you've been bogged down in internal strife. If your own party doesn't fully support you, how can Canadians trust you to lead through one of the most defining
I think you're a little bit behind me. Hey, click the live button and it'll boot you into the right live stream.
On the unceded territories of the Algonquin peoples.
I am in the live one.
I think you're like 30
period,
seconds
and
behind me.
I wish that our party had been further ahead, particularly at this moment. Absolutely. Do I believe that we have wonderful candidates running all over the country that you should consider voting for?
I'm gonna try
Absolutely.
refreshing, but
being who I am and in this position has been incredibly hard. Being here tonight was not an obvious thing. I've had to crawl over a lot of broken glass to get here. I'm proud to be here. I'm proud to be the first of my kind. And because I am the first of my kind, I know that I won't be the last.
Thank you, Ms. Paul. And to you, Mr. O'Toole. Mr. O'Toole, you recommend vaccinations, but you won't make your candidates get them. You have a climate plan, but you won't dump a candidate that shares climate conspiracies. You're on record supporting the LGBTQ2 community, but
Spicy
you
question
allowed
for
half
O'Toole.
your MPs to vote against legislation protecting them. Tell me, how can voters trust that it's you and not your caucus that will be in charge of a conservative policy agenda?
Well, thank you, Ms. Curl. I'm a new leader of the Conservative Party, and we have a plan to get the country back on its feet after a difficult 18 months in this crisis. I'm a pro-choice ally to the LGBTQ community. That comes from my service in the military, where I served alongside people from all backgrounds, all orientations, putting the country first. And our platform, including a detailed plan on climate change, is about making sure we secure the future. Jobs, accountability, national leadership on mental health.
Sir,
I'm glad that he has these positions, but yeah, he needs to make everyone toe the party line.
Make sure we get this country
I'm pretty sure also the military, like,
they
say they don't discriminate, but I don't know about that one.
Community, Indigenous Canadians.
They are generally better, but
all secure a future together.
Still problems.
Thank you, Mr. O'Toole.
Yeah, that was a non-answer.
All right, leaders, thank you. It is now time
That's
for
the
our
huge
first
problem with the
face-to-face
Conservatives, that you
debate.
can't.
Mr. Trudeau, Ms. Paul, you're up. Starting with Mr. Trudeau, based on this question.
Right, so he just finished talking for me.
You call yourself a feminist, but on your watch, sexual misconduct in Canada's armed forces continues to run rampant.
Because it says I'm at 0-0.
Okay.
Tell me,
we should be a little bit closer in
allowing
time
these
now.
unacceptable conditions to continue?
I think we recognize that there are systems and institutions that need to change across the country, and that's why from the very beginning we stepped up with policies, new policies, stronger policies and processes to support every survivor, everyone who comes forward, because nobody deserves to work in a workplace where they are being discriminated against, where they are being harassed or hassled. We have been unequivocal about that. My leadership has been unequivocal about that. Yes, these problems continue in workplaces across the country, particularly in the military. That's unacceptable, which is why we've taken even stronger measures. It's unsatisfactory to have to say, we're relying on process in this. We want to just be able to have easy answers.
Ms.
But
Paul,
this is
what's
not
your
an
response
issue
to that?
with easy answers. You have to fall back on process.
I have said before, and I'll say again tonight, that I do not believe that Mr. Trudeau is a real feminist. A feminist doesn't continue to push strong women out of his party when they are just seeking to serve. And I will say their names tonight and thank them. Thank you, Jane Philpott. Thank you, Jody Wilson-Raybould. Thank you, Selena Cesar Chavanez, and I'm here tonight thanks to the work that you have done. I believe that if there were more women on this platform tonight and in previous years, that we, in fact, would have better laws in our military. We would have childcare at this point. We would have many of the things that we need. I am the only woman, other than Elizabeth May, to be on this platform in the last 18 years. The Liberal Party has never had a woman lead it. I think it's time for the party to examine its priorities.
Ms. Hall, you'll perhaps understand that I won't take lessons on caucus management from you.
And
I think what I will keep focused on is making sure that our first woman finance minister has moved forward on
all right, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Trudeau, I'm sorry, that's time. We have to move on. Mr. Blanchette, Mr. O'Toole, and Mr. Singh, this next topic is for you to debate.
Spice right out the gate, baby.
Canada's transition to a green economy depends on pipelines. At a time when Ontario and Quebec face uncertain energy supply over Line 5, this country cannot extract nor distribute oil domestically. Our theme is leadership.
Here's a good Alberta
Tell
question,
me,
I guess.
which one of you is best to lead on these complex issues? Mr. Blanchette, per the draw, you begin.
I'm not very much interested in leading Canada. However, I am very much interested in making sure that Quebec is entitled to its own vision for the future. You know, in Quebec, we do not have energy issues that much because we are lucky. We are lucky. It's a bit of luck that we can produce green energy in a large amount. But the whole planet cannot afford this idea, this very Canadian idea, this very conservative idea, and as far as I know, this very liberal idea that we have to produce more oil, export more oil, believing that the money from it will reduce gas emission, which won't happen.
All Canadian families deserve an economic recovery, including families in Western Canada that feel left out after 6 years of Mr. Trudeau. When it comes to leadership, our natural resources sector is a leader in environmental social governance. Anytime Canadian resources are removed from the global supply chain, you know who fills that gap? Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Russia. All of these organizations and companies are getting their emissions down. Let's get emissions down, and Canadian resources to markets so that we can have jobs, opportunity, and fight climate change.
Mr. Singh.
When it comes to leadership on the fighting this essential crisis, one of the biggest crises we're up against, we've got a difficult choice for Canadians. You've got on one side someone who doesn't believe there's a crisis, and then on the other you got Mr. Trudeau who doesn't act like there's a crisis. And what it's going to take is real leadership. Because the solutions are there. We can invest in green energy, clean energy. We can invest in renewable energy.
Doesn't give up on tens of thousands of workers across the country.
We'll never give up on workers. We're
workers that are working hard for their families, so we can get our resources to market.
Okay, one at a time, gentlemen. Mr. O'Toole, then back to you, Mr. Singh. Mr. O'Toole, then Mr. Singh.
I want to see Canadians get back to work in all sectors and in all regions. And I'm proud of what we produce in our country, whether it's our resources or the resources in the heads of our young people.
But
we need to get emissions down.
It's not going to happen because oil is a dying industry.
These workers need a plan that's going to create jobs for the future. And that's a responsibility of government. We've seen 6 years of Mr. Trudeau, and workers can't afford another 4 years. What we need to do is invest in a diversified economy, clean energy. We need to electrify transportation. We need to invest in retrofitting homes and buildings. We need to create good jobs for workers
plan
now.
But we need an economic recovery in all sectors
that have failed workers.
I don't think they're really arguing at each other.
Last word to you, sir.
They seem like they are, but they're not really saying anything that's contradicting each other.
Proposing solutions, admitting a problem, which they're not doing.
All right, thank you. My next question is for all of you. We've had some encouraging news out of Kabul overnight with the escape of 43 Canadians.
He did make a point there.
That said, thousands of people
who
left Canada during Canada's mission in Afghanistan have been left behind in their hour of need, and it is unknown if we will ever get them all out. To each of you, what would you have done differently? Mr. O'Toole, per the draw, you begin.
Canada should never leave behind people that are at risk because they helped us. When Afghanistan was falling, there were 1,200 Canadians and hundreds more translators and others waiting for help from Canada. What did Mr. Trudeau do? You called an election, sir. You put your own political interests ahead of the well-being of thousands of people. Leadership is about putting others first, not yourself. Mr. Trudeau, you should not have called this election. You should have gotten the job done in Afghanistan.
Mr. O'Toole,
hold on. This is not open debate, leaders. This is a situation where we're asking a question to each of you. No problem, Mr. Trudeau. I'm trying to keep track myself.
I would like him, Ms. Curl, because he called an election in the fourth wave of a pandemic with fires in British Columbia and with unfinished business in Afghanistan,
All right,
Trudeau.
Thank you, Mr. O'Toole. I'm going to give the opportunity next per the draw to Mr. Singh. You guys will have tons of time to debate, so hang tight. Mr. Singh.
Sadly, what's happened in Afghanistan is a tragedy that was something we knew about. We knew about the withdrawal date. We knew from President Biden what that date would be. And sadly, I agree with Mr. O'Toole on this one point that it was a bad decision to call an election while this crisis was going on, particularly because we've got allies on the ground that put their lives at risk to support our Canadian forces who are now looking at peril for their lives and may never get out of Afghanistan. We know the impact on women and girls in Afghanistan. It's heartbreaking, and it could have been avoided. Veterans had told Mr. Trudeau and his government for a long time that the current approach was not working. Those calls were not heeded. And as a result, we're in this really horrible situation.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Thank you, Mr. Singh. Mr. Blanchette.
First, good news. I seem to understand from what I read a few hours ago that Kabul airport is now being open for some people to get out of the country, which is very good news. This should have been worked a long, long time ago. I agree with Mr. O'Toole that Mr. Trudeau should have put those people's interest before his own. However, the problem is that Canada has failed many times to create some strong partnerships with other countries in order to be stronger facing a situation like Afghanistan now, because by itself, we must admit, Canada is not a world power.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchette. Mr. Trudeau,
I do like Blanchette a lot because he does have a pretty reasonable approach to most of his answers.
To
I noticed that from the French debate yesterday. He's got some pretty good, honest
Canadian
answers.
Armed Forces, that are diplomats, that are consular officials did from the beginning of the summer to ensure that as of the very beginning of August, well before this election, we were getting flights out of Afghanistan. We got 3,700 people out of Afghanistan. And over the past weeks, we've been working with the Qataris, for example, on exactly that good news that we've seen of more people, more Canadians getting out of Afghanistan. We work closely with our allies because we know Canadians sacrificed in Afghanistan for a better future. We need to stand by the people who helped us, who helped themselves, and we will with even more people coming to Canada in the coming months.
All right, Mr. Trudeau. Ms. Paul.
As a former diplomat and with a husband who provided advice on the peace negotiations in Afghanistan, we were hearing the stories all the time in the months leading up that this was foreseeable. And so it seems like we got better information on our smartphones than Mr. Trudeau got from our entire intelligence service based on what he's saying. The thing is that when people count on you, when you make a promise to them, then you do it so that people can count on Canada's word. When someone is your partner, you go with them, you go for them, or you don't amount to much. And so leaving behind people in Afghanistan, walking up to Rideau Hall and calling an election under these circumstances was not the right thing to do. And to borrow a line from Mr. Singh from 2019, Mr. Trudeau could just say, hey, man, I messed up.
All right, Ms. Paul, thank you very much.
Rip.
Thank you all. And now it is our time for a first attempt at open debate. Jumping off of this question. Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor have been in Chinese prisons.
Okay, you are definitely ahead of me. I'd say by at least like 5 seconds.
Days.
Okay, I'll
the next
again.
Prime Minister has key decisions to make about our already tense relationship with China, such as telecommunications security and foreign investment. Some say this all comes down to a trade-off between Canada's economic growth and recognition of human rights. I'd like to know where you all stand. I'm sure you want to exchange on that. Mr. Singh, per the draw, you begin. Leaders, you may jump in.
Thank you very much.
We're starting with Mr. Singh.
We know that
same.
we can't imagine what it is for Mr. Spavor and Mr. Kovrig to be going through 1,000+ days in a prison without access to human rights. I can't imagine what their friends and their families are going through right now. All I know is we have to do everything possible to secure the release of these 2 Canadians. We need to work with our allies, apply pressure, and make sure that we return these Canadians home. That's what we've got to do.
And that's exactly what we've been doing. Over the past 3 years, we have worked with international allies to put pressure on China in every single one of their meetings. We've worked closely with the United States. We, at the G7 a few weeks ago, worked with the international community to make sure we're moving forward on challenging China where necessary in human rights, competing with them economically where we need to, and holding them to account on the rule of law as a global community. And Canada's voice has been very strong on that.
Canada's voice has been absent, Mr. Trudeau. We have not worked with our allies on Huawei. We have not stood up for the 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong. We've not fought for the 2 Michaels and put pressure on the communist regime. We have not stood up for human rights. Sir, you did not show up for a vote declaring a genocide towards the Uyghur people. You didn't show up.
I think all of these points are solid.
That was leading the fight against apartheid. We created the UN Human Rights Code. We should be leaders for our values, sir. And you've let the Michaels down, and we have to get serious with China.
If you want to let the Michaels and get the Michaels home, you do not simply lob tomatoes across the Pacific. That is what Mr. Harper tried for a number of years and didn't get anywhere. You need to engage in a sophisticated way with our allies every step of the way.
You have to take
and
the
put
same
that
position on Huawei,
and that's exactly
on
what we
steel,
have done
on
every step of the time.
on cyber security, Mr. Trudeau. We are out of step, and our allies are wondering where Canada's gone. You started as Prime Minister saying you admired China.
If I could...
I'm coming to you, Ms. Paul. Just a second. I want to get to Mr. Singh, and then to you, Ms. Paul.
I appreciate, thank you very much, the opportunity. I want to also we're talking about leadership and accountability. And in this pandemic, one of the moments I think of leadership that has been a failure is the fact that when we talk about leadership, it means finding solutions. And in our long-term care homes here in Canada, we saw the worst conditions in the for-profit.
Mr. Singh, we're going to have time to chat with that later. The topic is China, human rights and economic growth. To you, Ms. Paul.
Bonked.
Yes, and this is an area where certainly lines are being redrawn all across the world. And the main thing that Canada is going to have going forward in terms of currency is its word. When we make a promise, we have to keep those promises. That's how, when we need help, we get it. You know, my mom grew up on a farm in a small community, and she learned very young and taught us that you have to give your word to your neighbors, and they have to be able to count on it so that when you need help, they're there for you. And so when we don't show up, when we're asked for vaccines from COVAX, and then we take vaccines from COVAX, when the Uyghur ask us for help to declare a genocide and we don't do that, when we don't show up on the climate by setting targets that are ambitious, but at the same time in line with our international partners and do our fair share, then our word doesn't count for much, and then it makes it very hard for us to help people like the Michaels when they need us the most.
Mr. Blanchet, did you want to get in on
Throwing
this?
tomatoes might not be the solution, but I would submit humbly that doing nothing might not be the solution either. The Mr. Trudeau's record on human rights is not perfect. We might name the two Michaels, we might name Uyghur in Xinjiang, we might name Taiwan, Hong Kong, we might name Catalonia and Mr. Puigdemont, we might name the worst of all,
Mr. Blanchet.
Raif Badawi being still held in Saudi Arabia because Canada wants to sell weapons and military supply to Saudi Arabia, which is unacceptable. The Parliament voted.
Okay, gentlemen, one at a time.
Seconds, the Parliament voted unanimously to give citizenship to Raif Badawi. Nothing has been done afterward.
All right. Whoa, Mr. O'Toole, Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Singh.
Mr. Blanchet is correct. Canada is needed back on the world stage. We may be smaller than China with respect to population and economy, but we are a giant when it comes to our commitments to human rights, to dignity, and to the rule of law. And we have to start working with our allies to take a more serious approach for human rights, standing up for our workers on fair trade, and making sure that our voice is a principled one on the world stage again.
The problem with Mr. O'Toole and his principles is he says all the right-sounding things, and he's working on reassuring everyone that he's right there as a strong leader. But he can't convince his candidates to get vaccinated. He can't convince his MPs to follow
Let's keep the theme. Mr.
Boom.
Singh, you wanted to get in. I'm giving the last word. I'm giving the last word to Mr. Singh. Mr. Trudeau, please. To you, Mr. Singh.
Leadership means standing up. It means standing up for the Uyghur in China. It means standing up to defend people around the world. It also means showing leadership when it comes to fighting the climate crisis. We've got the worst record under Mr. Trudeau in the G7. So that's not leadership, certainly not.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, leaders. We are now moving on to our next theme, which is climate change.
Just saying, would have got some more time to talk there.
Yeah. He tried to change the subject early on, and that was a big no-no. He fucked himself there.
Yeah, he did fuck himself there. That felt bad.
Yep. Nova Scotia. He's
you don't move the goalposts.
Trevor, what's your question?
Hey, good evening. As leader, what immediate actions would you take to make green technology more accessible and affordable so that everyday Canadians don't have to bear the financial burden of being environmentally ethical?
All right. Thank
Amazing
you, Trevor.
question.
Leaders, you've heard Trevor's question. Ms. Paul, I apologize. Ms. Paul, you're going first.
Thank you so much for that question. And Trevor, that's exactly where your head should be at. That's where all of our heads should be at.
Moderator.
How can we use this opportunity to seize the moment to create a green economy? How can we incentivize every single person in Canada, every company, and every enterprise to adopt green technologies? How can we become a global leader? And so absolutely, if you look at our platform, you will see that we propose incentives all the way from buying electric cars, new and used, to retrofitting homes, to all of these items that will help make life easier for you and help for you to do your part. But this is a national and international issue. We need national leadership on it, and we need it across party lines.
Thank you, Ms. Paul. Mr. Singh.
I don't like her answer.
Thank you,
it's
Trevor.
too vague.
I really appreciate the question.
That's fair.
And I'm sure you speak to a lot of young people as a
very
teacher
curious to see what
and are seeing the fear in their eyes, the worry and the desperation that young people have because they don't know what type of future they're going to inherit. And they're worried about the impacts of the climate crisis because it's hurting us now and it's only going to get worse if we don't do anything about it. And to invest in that future, we need to make choices. And right now, we look at the choices Mr. Trudeau has made over the past 6 years. He has promised to end fossil fuel subsidies, but instead of ending them, he has increased them to $900 million per year. That is money we could spend on investing in clean technology, in making it easier for people to access that technology and to do our part to fight the climate crisis. So it's a matter of choices. We can't afford another 4 years of Mr. Trudeau's choices.
Thank you, Mr. Singh.
I don't like that answer either.
Thank you for the question, Trevor. I was raised by two strong women who were teachers, and they told me to be
policy
straight up.
answers.
This
I
is
want to
an
know what they're
area
going
where
to
the
do.
Conservatives, we had to win back some trust. We hadn't met the expectations of Canadians on climate change. It's an important issue for me as a father of a high schooler, and we talk about it all the time. That's why in April, long before the election, I put out a substantial package pricing carbon to meet our Paris targets. And what's interesting, our low carbon savings account will allow people to actually make green choices to lower their carbon footprint. This approach is innovative because it would allow all Canadians to know what their carbon footprint is and make those innovative investments to lower it. I think we all have a role to play, and our plan is detailed and we'll deliver on it.
Mr. Blanchet.
Thank you to be with us, sir. I hope you appreciate a little bit blunt answers. First, you put a ceiling on any production of oil and gas. You take all the money that the federal government is placing into that industry, even more by the Liberals than the Conservatives before, and you put that into green energy. And you take the money for Trans Mountain and you give it to Alberta for Alberta to initiate its own transition toward a greener
You got to be
economy.
kidding me.
This is the way to do things, because if we
He's giving the best answer.
That's a strong
about
answer.
Reducing gas emission while increasing production, we will never get there.
This is insane.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchet. Mr. Trudeau.
Bloc Québécois.
Thank you, Trevor, for your question. From one
What's
teacher
going
to
on,
another,
my
I
dude?
know, that you need to ground your decisions and what you share with your students in science. And all these leaders on here have various claims about what their climate change plan is going to do. Unfortunately, if you look at what the experts and the climate scientists and the economists have said, we're the ones with the strongest plan to fight climate change. And how to answer your question specifically, how to make it more affordable for Canadians? Well, the first thing we did on that was bring in a national price on pollution that incentivizes businesses to go cleaner at the same time as it puts more money in families' pockets. We are going to put a cap on oil sands and oil and gas emissions and decline it until net zero and create those opportunities and investments that are going to make it more affordable for you and your students for many years to come.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Thank you,
Trudeau was in the
Trevor.
middle
Have a
there, I
good
think, with his
evening.
answers.
I'm turning it
He
back
built
to the
on what
leaders. It is
Blanchet
time
said.
for more debate.
Not as well,
The
though.
draw has Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole facing off. Your topic is climate change. Even today, 1 in 4 Canadians don't believe that climate change is caused
Somebody
by
commented
human
on my chat and said,
activity.
I wonder if the Queen
How
is
can
watching
we
this.
achieve real progress when so many people are still debating the fundamentals? Mr. O'Toole, you begin.
Climate change is a real threat, not only to Canada and to the world. That's why we have to take a serious plan to tackle it. That's why, as I said, we put our plan out in April, because we had to restore some trust on this issue to make sure we can show Canadians we can get emissions down and get the economy working again. That is key. We have a plan to meet our Paris targets, but minimize the impact on jobs and investment. We're also going to make major investments in electric vehicles, in the hydrogen economy, small modular reactors. There is so much we can do to get our emissions down, but grow a strong economy, because without a strong economy, we can't tackle climate change. We can't tackle the issues of today.
The reality that Mr. O'Toole has never understood is you can't have a strong economy unless you tackle climate change. And you ask about how we're going to convince the quarter of Canadians who still don't think climate change is real. Well, Mr. O'Toole can't even convince his party that climate change is real, because they voted against that. And that's perhaps why his plan is so weak. His plan is to go back to the Harper targets, to the Harper approach on fighting climate change, which doesn't work. His costed platform, which he just put out last night, cuts $2 billion from climate investments and from things. And for our friends in BC,
you have never made a target,
has proposed to restore
let him respond, Mr. Trudeau.
Pipeline.
Mr. Trudeau, let Mr. O'Toole respond to you.
Let him finish his point.
Thank you, Ms.
What do you mean?
Mr. Trudeau always forgets one fact. He has never made a target for climate change. He has great ambition. That's part of the reason we're in an election in a pandemic, is his ambition. He doesn't have achievement. Well, he never meets his targets. So we have a plan
off topic.
that we will meet the
targets. It's
difficult
and
to
meet
our
a target
country
that's 9 years away, except for the fact that right now we are on track
Gentlemen,
to beat
we have to wrap this segment.
Over
All right, we are moving on. We are moving on, leaders. Next up is Mr. Singh, Mr. Blanchet, and Ms. Paul. I'd like each of you to describe how you'll implement a national approach that best recognizes the significant regional differences involved in fighting climate change. You begin, Mr. Singh. You may jump in. One at a time, please.
Of course.
Well, here's the thing. We just heard Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Trudeau argue about who's worse. And honestly, it's a tough question to answer. Let me tell you, you're not stuck with these two. Better is possible. We can invest in a clean economy. We can end fossil fuel subsidies. We can make sure we're creating clean transportation, and we can invest in provinces and territories to make sure they have the resources necessary to fight the climate crisis. I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. I'm going to be a dad soon, and I want to make sure my child grows up into a future that has the same opportunities that I had, that has clean air, clean water, a clean place to live. I want to make sure that that's
as far as I understand it, it is not a national or even less a regional issue. It is a planetary issue, and it has to be tackled by everybody at once. But I would be glad to give some of my precious time to Mr. O'Toole, because a week ago, a little more than that, he said in French that he did not want anymore to have a pipeline to go through Quebec. That was quite a statement. He said that in French, no more pipeline through Quebec. I want to hear that in English tonight. Please, please.
Well, Mr.
Hold on. This segment is
quite frankly, this
we're not going to let that happen.
This on the climate, this sort of approach is going to get us nowhere, and I mean but nowhere. It is, and the question was an excellent one. This is a global issue. This is a national issue. This is a nonpartisan issue, and we have got to be able to come together across party lines. I said that I was available for a debate just on the climate because it's that important, but we've invited many times all of the parties to join us in a joint cabinet, a cross-party cabinet, to deal with this the way that we dealt with the pandemic, together. People were so inspired to see these leaders come together in the early days of the pandemic. We have got to bring that same approach here. Let's come together because that's what's needed.
Thank you very much. I absolutely agree. We do need to come together. I can lay out what we shouldn't do and what we need to do. What we shouldn't do is what Mr. Trudeau did. Set targets and miss them. We shouldn't promise to end fossil fuel subsidies and then increase them. We shouldn't put a price on pollution and then exempt the biggest polluters. What we need to do is end those fossil fuel subsidies, invest in provinces and territories with infrastructure that's going to help us fight the climate crisis.
Hold on, Mr. Singh.
With the greatest of respect to
let Ms. Paul respond.
With the greatest of respect to Mr. Singh,
the moderator's so fucked.
Making this invitation for
if you cut someone off, you get to talk
it has
now.
Never been accepted by the NDP or any other party.
All right, we have to wrap this section now, leaders. It is time for me, with great pleasure, to welcome Mercedes Stephenson of Global News. She is joining us now, and she's going to be asking each of you a direct question on climate change. This round starts with Mr. Trudeau. Hi, Mercedes.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Hello, candidates. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to ask you about a question that is on a lot of Canadians' minds, the question of climate change. Mr. Trudeau, starting with you. On your watch, Canada's greenhouse gas emissions have gone up every year since 2016, giving this country the worst emissions reduction record in the G7. According to the most recent data from your government, Canada's emissions in 2019 were just as high as they were 15 years ago. Environmentalists say that your performance is insufficient. If you're so serious about climate change, why are Canada's emissions still going up?
Well, we inherited a government from conservatives that did not believe in the fight against climate change, and we had a lot of catching up to do. But what we were able to do in 6 years is bring a national price on pollution, ban single-use plastics, move forward in protecting more of our coasts and oceans and rivers than any government in history. And we are right now on track to exceeding those 2030 targets set at the beginning at Paris, down to 36%. And we've gone even further with that, with a concrete plan that the experts have said is the only one that can achieve a 40%
which they say
reduction.
You're unlikely to meet.
That is what we're dealing with.
Okay, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Blanchet.
Madame.
Your party often criticizes the oil and gas industry in Canada's western provinces. You've said that you would block pipelines trying to go through Quebec. While you were the environment minister, though, you allowed oil exploration and carbon-intensive projects without environmental assessment. So why the double standard, and what do you say to Canadians who feel that you're blocking their prosperity?
There were three issues that have been raised since I've been into this election. First one is having reversed the 9B line of Enbridge, which had been reversed a few years sooner without any evaluation or anything. Second one is a project in Baie des Chaleurs, which already had been submitted to an evaluation, an environmental evaluation. And the other one was to have an environmental, I will come to that, evaluation after the exploration. This is all a build-up made by the previously environmentalist Stephen Guilbeault from the Parti Libéral, which the Prime Minister did not even know about when he attacked me with it. My record is also having signed the carbon market with California, which is still considered the best way to tackle the gas emission through incentives and tariffs around, I wouldn't say the world,
All right,
at
Mr.
least North America.
That is time. Mercedes, your next question.
Mr. O'Toole, you're next. Under your
It seemed like a
plan,
decent
Canada
answer,
would
but I don't really know
abandon
much
its
of what he was
current
talking
climate
about.
target.
Same,
Instead,
I don't either.
you
I feel
would
like that one
settle
was a
for
little
weaker
targeted.
one. In fact, it's one set 6 years ago by Stephen Harper. World leaders are meeting this fall to ratchet up their commitments on climate change.
They gotta get off
on
the Harper
global
train,
stage,
baby.
Yet you would
True.
walk ours back.
Oh.
You've said that climate change is real and you've endorsed carbon pricing, but your target is the lowest of all of the major parties who are here tonight.
Bonk.
Why should Canadians settle for your plan and a plan that would take our targets back in time?
Because Canadians deserve to have a plan and leadership to make the targets. Mr. Trudeau went to Paris. The targets I'm talking about making are the ones he signed on to, and then for 6 years did not make them. He likes to blame everyone else but himself for action. So what we did, because as I said, Mercedes, we have to build trust on this issue, we went out and worked with the top consultancy in the country to come up with a plan to price carbon, to get our emissions down to meet Paris, but to also get people back to work. After COVID-19, with $500 billion worth of debt put on by Mr. Trudeau, with a cost of living crisis, we also need to have a strong economy to get our emissions down. We will make our emission targets, and I think it's important for Canada to have a plan to meet what it signs on to internationally.
Ms. Paul of the Green
I wish
Party,
she would
obviously
push her
environment,
questions
big
a little
focus
more
in your plan, calls
instead of just
for a
asking while they're
60%
still
reduction
talking
in
and then
Canada's
not asking
emissions
again.
by the year 2030.
True.
Other countries that are making that commitment don't face the same challenges that we do here in Canada. We live in a cold, northern, sprawling country, and our economy still relies on resource extraction, much of which you've said you would shut down completely in your platform. How would you offset the economic harm that would result from meeting such an aggressive target?
Thanks for the question. And first, let me say that when I think about our future and I think about the future of energy, Canada will remain an energy superpower, but we will be a renewable energy superpower. And I think about my brother who was a roughneck out on the oil patch until the bust during the pandemic. And I think about his future, and I know that we have got to diversify our economy. But I tell the people of Canada today that what happens next is really up to you. We can keep moving towards a mirage, and that is what these promises are, a mirage that's just out there in the distance that we never arrive at. Or you can send people back to Ottawa from every single party who are committed to working together across party lines on the greatest existential challenge of our time and seizing the opportunity of a truly green recovery.
Mr. Singh.
Okay, I like her. I like what she said, but it wasn't an answer. It wasn't really an answer, though.
I like her statement, I guess.
Yeah, I completely agree with it.
On whether or not you would cancel the Trans
the
Mountain
answer's pretty
Pipeline
easy there, though. You just got to say
you've had years as NDP leader to
that
develop
we just
the
transition the
climate
jobs
plan.
to green
Your
jobs.
platform
There you
has
go.
lots of big ideas and big targets, but almost no details on how you would get there. Don't you owe Canadians a clear answer on your climate roadmap, and will you provide one tonight?
Absolutely, and I'm honored to do so. We've got a bold plan that's going to take a lot of courage, that requires lots of investment, because we know how serious this crisis is. And we know what we're up against. Unlike Mr. Trudeau, we're not going to blame previous governments. We know that in power, we have the power to make a change. And if we vote for the same things, we're going to get the same results. So I want Canadians to know you have a choice.
That is the truest statement.
What is your plan, sir?
We'll lay some of it out. One of it is to end fossil fuel subsidies, use that to invest in clean energy. We would make sure we prioritize investing in electrified transportation. We would invest in retrofitting homes and buildings to reduce our emissions. There is so much that we can do. We are confident we can do it. But there is a cost if we continue down the same path of conservative or liberals who don't take this seriously. You have a choice.
I do like those solution answers.
Thank you.
True.
Now
Very
it is
good.
time for open debate. Mercedes is going to keep you leaders on theme. I'm going to keep you on time and make sure everyone has a chance to be heard. Ms. Paul, we're starting with you. Back to you, Mercedes.
Thank you. Canadians want their government to fight climate change, but they also worry about the cost for their families. And we know there will be a cost to this. Why should Canadians trust your party to see us through this?
There is a global green rush going on now to create the competitive green economy of the future. What the Greens don't want to see is Canada being left behind, because that is exactly what's happening. You know, I'm sure that the last candle maker was the person that had the market cornered on candle making, but if everyone has moved on to LED lights, then you're in trouble. And so what we want to see is us seizing this opportunity. And Mercedes, to your earlier question, if Denmark and Greenland, other cold countries, can end oil exploration, then certainly we can do it. And if 27 countries in the European Union can come together collaboratively to have an ambitious plan for the climate, then surely with leadership, we can do the same here in Canada. I know Canada can do anything that any other country can do.
Absolutely. I think we
That was great.
If any type of energy is removed from the global market, Canadian energy, it's replaced by a bad actor country that doesn't have carbon reduction programs, it doesn't have human rights, it doesn't have engagement with Indigenous communities. Indigenous partnerships in natural resources is huge. So you said the cost. There are tens of thousands of jobs that deserve an economic recovery just as much as anyone else. There are Indigenous partnerships, economic reconciliation, and a move towards a made in Canada net zero by 2050. So let's be leaders in getting carbon emissions down and being world leaders on how we have natural resources, whether it's energy, timber, rare earth minerals for EVs. We can be world leaders again.
Let's talk about the cost. The cost of inaction is an entire town of Lytton being wiped out by a climate forest fire. The cost of inaction is forest fires and flooding and heat waves that mean Canadians lose their lives. The cost of not acting means a young woman I met in Hamilton who looked me in the eyes and said, what's the point of me pursuing my education? What's the point of me finding a partner or even starting a family when I don't know what type of future I'll live in, let alone my child? That's the cost of inaction. That's the cost of Mr. Trudeau, who had 6 years to do something about this.
Again, Mr.
It's not
Singh.
2 years. It's
Again,
not a
Mr.
small
Singh.
mandate. 6 years. And he failed you.
I really wish Mr. Singh would get over the.
When we talk about
he attacked the Liberals earlier for blaming previous governments, but it seems like all he's doing is blaming Trudeau.
We have not
He's focusing more on attacking Trudeau than he is on like his own solutions. And I don't know if that's like I don't like it personally. I'm not sure if that sits better with voters though. But I really don't like it.
We agree on that, you and I both.
I want to hear
So
solutions.
how is it that the experts that have rated our plan on climate to be an A have rated your plan to be an F?
I rate your track record an F, Mr. Trudeau. You've had 6 years.
You don't get to rate.
I rate.
You don't get to experts. Why did the experts give you an F on your climate plan?
Let's talk about right now. Let me respond to this. Let's talk. You're talking about the future. Let's talk about right now. You had 6 years, and you've got the. Let me finish. Let me finish. You've got the worst track record in all the G7 after 6 years. How can people trust you?
Why didn't you put forward an ambitious plan?
Mr. Singh, Mr. Trudeau, then Ms. Paul, then Mr. Blanchard.
I don't accept that, first of all. I don't accept that at all. We've got both
Hold on, Ms. Paul.
a strong plan.
Mr. Singh, thank you very much.
Trudeau's face is me there.
He cannot explain why his plan is being panned by experts. Now, every politician up here says, we have the best plan. We actually have a record. And what Mercedes' question was, how do we make sure it's it's affordable. We brought in a price on pollution across the country that puts more money back in the pockets in the provinces where it had to be imposed because Conservative politicians fought against it every step of the way.
Ms. Paul, Ms. Paul.
With the greatest of respect, I think the 5 PhDs in our shadow cabinet who put together our green recovery policy would disagree with you, with the experts. But I do want to say more generally that, again, this is getting us nowhere. We have got to be able to come together across party lines, not only to face the existential crisis that Mr. Singh described, but also to seize the greatest economic opportunity that Canada has seen within our lifetimes. We are being left behind. And if the United States can do it, if the European Union can do it, I know that we can do it. It's about a change in the culture.
All right, thank you, Ms. Paul. Mr. Blanchette, did you want to get in?
The clock shows that I'm quite behind everybody else, and I have 12 seconds left.
Take some time,
I will disagree
sir.
with the basic statement. There's possibility to create more wealth to absorb the cost of the changes that we need. We must stop opposing environment and creating wealth. It may go together well. This is the change that we have to do.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mercedes. And now, leaders, we are moving on to our next
And I feel like he's getting some really good answers.
He is by far, so far, I would say he's killing it. But that's just my perspective.
I think he's also killing it.
Now we are going to our first-time voter, Merrick McLeod in Sault Ste. Marie. He's got a question to all the leaders. Merrick, you're 18 years old. You're a first-time voter. What is your question to the leaders? Go ahead, Merrick. The leaders are listening.
I was like, what is he holding?
In the Ojibwe culture, trust and respect is key to any relationship. Oh, shoot.
You got it, Merrick. Keep going.
How can I trust and respect the federal government after 150 plus years of lies and abuse to my people? And as Prime Minister, what will you do to rebuild the trust between First Nations and the federal government?
Good question.
Thank you, Merrick. Leaders, you've heard the question. How do you respond to Merrick? Mr. Trudeau, you start this round.
Thank you, Merrick, for your question. You're absolutely right. Over the past 150 years, Canada has failed in its relationship with Indigenous peoples. People who we should be working with in shared stewardship of the land, working with in partnership as we draw from the bounty and the beauty of this land to build a better future for all. That is why over the past 6 years, we have stepped up on the path of reconciliation. We have ended boil water advisories in 109 different communities. We have made sure that tens of thousands of young people get to go to school in better classrooms. We continue to move forward on fighting fighting for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and ensuring a true partnership as we move forward in respect.
Mr. Blanchette.
Your question is quite moving. I would say that no one is entitled to tell any nation what to do or what to think, and that every nation has to be recognized as such. Either it is a nation of 300 people, like there is in Quebec, or an 8 million people nation like Quebec is. It calls for a relationship between equals. It calls for a relationship in which nobody tells the other party that they are stronger, bigger, richer, and therefore you will do as you are told, even if we say it politely. And first, you provide clean water to everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchette. Ms. Paul.
Yes, and thank you so much for
that
the question. And I
Yeah,
understand the
really
anguish
address
in
much
it
of
as
the
well,
point.
because justice delayed is justice denied. And coming from a diaspora myself, where we have been robbed of our culture, of our languages, of our history, I have no idea where my ancestors were born or where they're buried. I completely understand how important this is and how frustrating it is not to have seen the action. I am tired of being up on these stages without Indigenous leadership here to speak for itself. Jody Wilson-Raybould, Mumalak Kalak, I'm thinking of you right now. And when Ms. Kakak said that without action, that the Parliament would be hollow, she was right. So Indigenous sovereignty, self-determination, nation-to-nation engagement, that is my commitment.
Mr. O'Toole.
Mr. McLeod, thank you for the question.
Not really
and
an
the
answer
way you
either.
phrased it is so important.
Yeah.
Reconciliation is about trust and respect and restoring it after a century and a half of a federal government failing. That's why, as opposition leader, my first question when I rose in the House of Commons was on a call to action on reconciliation with respect to Indigenous health. We need to build partnerships. We need to restore trust. And that trust is eroded when you make commitments on safe drinking water on reserve, when you make commitments on the calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Report and have no plan to fulfill them. So I want to build partnerships and have Indigenous leaders have governance over the federal government finally delivering on our commitment to Indigenous peoples.
Mr. Singh.
Thank you very
It's
much,
a little
Merrick.
better.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah.
How to restore trust. How do you restore trust when Indigenous communities suffer injustice and it continues in an unbroken line to this very day? How do you restore trust when you've got a prime minister that takes a knee one day and then takes Indigenous kids to court the next? And how do you restore trust in a country as wealthy as ours,
Awkward.
a G7 nation in the 21st century that still does not provide clean drinking water to every single Indigenous nation? It starts by actually walking the path of reconciliation, not with the empty words, but real action, clean water, nation to nation, and respect.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Singh. Merrick,
More of the
did
same.
the leaders answer your question?
Yeah.
Please tell them they didn't.
Yeah.
No.
All right.
Sad.
Thank you very much.
It's an awkward
Miigwech.
situation to be in. So.
Yeah.
Messieurs Blanchette and O'Toole, it is your turn to debate now. You've promised more money to search for unmarked graves, but so much more needs to be done to achieve meaningful reconciliation. Mr. Blanchette, you begin. Tell me, how are you better positioned than Mr. O'Toole to restore justice?
No more.
I am not better positioned than Mr. O'Toole because I believe that this is a relationship between nations.
Yeah,
and
the
your presence
homeless
in nation, I feel I
text
represent
speech
another
is
one,
off for
and we
just
are
for the debate.
discussing with a lot of other nations. But I will remind everybody that on the last day of the last session, we had a motion adopted unanimously by the Parliament, and this motion was precisely saying what we had been told to carry by the First Nation leaders, and we had it adopted. This might be the way to do it. Many times the Bloc Québécois said, even if we don't agree with everything, that we would share our seats and our voices in the Parliament with the First Nations in order to have them being heard by the whole country.
After the tragic finding of graves in Kamloops, Cowessess, and other former residential school sites, we offered to work in a bipartisan fashion on calls to action 71 to 76. Those are related to former residential school sites. And we need to act faster. I know Mr. Trudeau cares a great deal about reconciliation. I know we all do. But this is an issue where we have to act. We can no longer say that we recognize the calls to action. We need a plan to achieve them. And what I'm proposing is a plan that builds partnerships, that builds governance, that has Indigenous leaders, incredible ones like Jody Wilson-Raybould, to allow us to actually hold ourselves to account. All parties, all future governments. This is the biggest scar in the history of Canada. And we have to tackle it not just with good intentions, but with a good plan to deliver for all Indigenous people.
Mr. Blanchette,
I must
briefly.
say that the Prime Minister has nominated Gouverneur Général, I don't know how to translate that, who speaks Inuktitut, which is great, but does not speak French. Still, he does not agree with the idea of acknowledging, recognizing First Nation languages as
he speaks
official
Inuktitut,
languages
but he doesn't
in
speak
this
French,
country.
so...
Yeah,
We
the
will
classic.
leave that segment there. Ms. Paul, Mr. Singh, Mr.
I missed
Trudeau,
the first
you're
thing that
up.
Blanchette answered
Tell me,
with.
what is
But
your
if he
plan
didn't
to
say
end
it,
the
I know that
disproportionate
Aaron
violence
O'Toole
against Indigenous
did bring up the
women and
calls to
girls?
action.
Ms. Paul.
Yeah.
For reconciliation, which is what I was looking for as an answer from one of the
leaders. We have done all these
leaders.
things and made all these promises. We know what needs to be done. The recommendations are there in the calls for justice and the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls report, and yet we still don't have the action. And so, as I said before, it should be Jody up here answering that question. It should be Mumala Kakak up here answering that question. We need to make the space for Indigenous leadership to guide this process, and above all, we need to make this a priority. All that is left now is political will.
But that is exactly what we have been doing, Ms. Paul. When we called the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls after years of governments avoiding doing that, we ensured that we brought the truth forward. And then we worked with Indigenous leaders groups, Indigenous women's groups to co-develop the action plan that we are now fully funding so we can get justice for the victims, healing for the families, and put an end to this ongoing national tragedy. It will take a lot of work by all of us, but we are walking this road in partnership because we know it needs to be done, and there is much more to do.
But Mr. Trudeau, sadly, and this, I don't take any pleasure in this, the calls to justice are out there, and you haven't acted on them. And I meant it when I said you can't take a knee one day if you're going to take Indigenous kids to court the next. That's not leadership.
Mr. Singh,
that's
you
not gonna
love
make things
that
better.
line about taking Indigenous kids to court. It's actually not true. We have committed to compensating those kids who went through that.
Listen,
and what's more than that, this is important, Mr. Singh.
No, you can't say you're not taking them to court when you're taking them to court.
When you talk
there
about
are kids out there that are being fought by you in court.
Leaders, I would actually remind you the question is about violence against Indigenous women and girls. Let me recenter you on that.
I appreciate it because he can't continue to say that. That doesn't make any sense.
And Ms. Curl, I will say again, I said this last night in the French debate, this is why we need more diversity in politics. This is why we need
I agree with what Anna's saying, but like the huge focus on liberal impol is just like,
we have only
I don't think it actually solves anything.
About how we are going to bring
it should be addressed, but I don't think it's going
to Indigenous women in this country. If we could stick to the topic.
It's not the nail in the coffin that she thinks it is.
It was brought up in the earlier one, and we talked about Indigenous women. I want to talk about those kids buried in unmarked graves across the country, because it was a tragedy for all Canadians, one long known by Indigenous peoples. But when I went to Cowessess to speak with Chief Casmus Delorme, we not only grieved those kids, we signed an agreement, a landmark agreement, to keep kids at risk in their communities, to take them out of the provincial system. That is how we move forward. It took years to sign that agreement, but we got it, and we are empowering Indigenous communities to care for their own kids. Mr. Trudeau,
we're out of time. Mr. Singh, I'm going to give you a very brief moment to respond. Briefly, we're over time.
We need to implement all the calls to justice. We need to listen to Indigenous women and girls. We need to make sure that they're safe, and we have the steps that they've laid out that we need to follow.
All right, thank you very much, leaders. Now I'm
happy that he said
to
that.
welcome Melissa Ridgen of
because that's what I was
APTN
looking for
News.
mostly. Is
Melissa's going to be asking you each a direct question on our theme of reconciliation. Your first question, hi Melissa, is to Mr. Blanchette. Over to you.
Tanshe, thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be here with you to ask some questions for our APTN audience. Mr. Blanchette, I'm going to start with you. You know, numerous government reports, including in Quebec, have sounded the alarm that systemic racism exists, from Joyce Echequan dying as she's taunted by hospital staff, to policing, the justice system. What will you do as Black leader to address systemic racism in your own province in Quebec and also elsewhere in Canada?
First, never underestimate the weight, the sadness of those dramas. Second, I acknowledge, I recognize the existence of systemic racism in June 2020. And then, what happened? It became a political tool against Quebec. It became a tool to say Quebec is this and that and racist and xenophobic and all of that, instead of opening a discussion, trying to find solution, consulting experts, discussing with the First Nations themselves. It became this white society against this other one, white society. We build nothing, so the words became toxic. I'm absolutely open to the idea of discussing all of that on a quiet stage without this being aggressive as this debate has become.
All right, Mr. Blanchet, we have to move on. Your next question, Melissa.
This question for you,
I
Ms.
don't
Paul.
like that.
Canada has more children
This
in
is
government
where the
custody
bloc
right
fails
now
the
than
hardest,
at
I
the height
think,
of
is the
residential
racial shit.
schools. New legislation, child welfare legislation, actually takes the onus on and puts it on the First Nations communities to bring their kids back, cleaning up the mess that Canada has created.
Yeah, the sick dude's
essentially.
fucking sweet, man.
And those children are going to have to be brought back to all of those same problems that still
Joke
exist,
meat.
that were the grounds for apprehension. What would you do in the House of Commons to make sure that poverty and trauma issues are addressed?
Thank you very much for that question, and absolutely, we mentioned that not that long ago in one of our statements that the residential school system had been replaced by children in care, and that this was just perpetuating the legacy of trauma. It really comes back to what I said before, which is that the Indigenous leadership is there. It is ready to guide all of these processes. We have all of the recommendations we need. What we are missing is political will. What we are missing is those who have been in power for a very long time, making space for new voices and diverse voices. I actually had to pull my jaw up, which just dropped, when I heard what Mr. Blanchet said. I invited Mr. Blanchet to get educated about systemic discrimination. I extend that invitation again. I would be happy to educate him.
It's nice to want to educate
This is
me.
my time, sir.
It is.
So it's nice time to insult people.
That was not an insult. It was an invitation to
Oh, shut down.
This is leader direct questions, Melissa. Your Mr.
I know U.S.
Blanchet.
debates were this time. You should have seen yesterday's debate. It was even more chill than this.
Mr. Blanchet,
So
you have
funny.
had every opportunity to
It's
jump
your
in an open
responsibility,
debate.
not mine, but some things
And
cannot
I am
be said.
fulfilling my responsibility, sir. Melissa, we're going to keep moving on.
Is
Your
it my
next
turn?
It is
Oh,
your turn.
dude, he is not happy about that.
Mr. Trudeau, this is for you. You know, your Liberal government has turned Indian
I
affairs
guess
into
people
two
don't like being called a
separate,
racist.
massive
True.
bureaucracies that eat up large portions of funding that will never see it on to reserve. It doesn't leave the bureaucracy. You know, you've promised clean drinking water, but billions of dollars later, that's not happened. Many still do not have clean drinking water. You know, Canadians and Indigenous people are losing patience with the lack of results from
Absolutely
all of this
bodied.
spending. So I guess the question is, why would they believe you a third term, that they would get results and you would be accountable for all that spending?
One of the enemies of progressive politics, Melissa, is cynicism. Is discounting the hard work that millions of people have been involved in over the past years. And yes, there's always more to do. Progressives always know there's more to do. But when we came into office, there were 105 long-term boil water advisories. We lifted 109 of them, and for each of the ones that are remaining, we have a project lead, a project team, and an action plan. And
You're saying that they lifted more than what there was
tens
listed?
of thousands
He must
of
have
kids
backwards those
across
numbers.
This country, Indigenous kids who've started the school year in new schools or refurbished schools. We have moved forward on settling more agreements and more land claims and more partnerships than any other government over the years.
I do think most of what he's saying is true, but it's always a you can do more
money in
thing.
Indigenous communities than any previous
Thank
government.
But the problem
And
is,
no,
like-
we're not done yet. We have
Like we said on anything, you
money,
can
I
always
don't
do
think
more. You
anybody's
can
questioning
always
the money spent. I think
be
that they're
better.
questioning the
Yeah.
results for the money that's spent.
It's kind of the thing that like
My next
the
question's to you, Mr. Singh.
the historical
You know,
record
federal
of like
forces, including the
things done for
RCMP and the
Indigenous
Department
people
of
is
Fisheries and
very
Oceans
like
have
I
been
would say
used
it's
throughout
fairly like
Canada's
weak.
history
Like the bar is
to
set
prevent
low,
First
and so
Nations
like
from
beating that bar,
exercising
yeah,
their
like you
treaty
beat it,
rights to
but like
fish and to hunt and to defend
we could
land
do
and
we could
water.
realistically do
This is happening
much
right
more.
now on both coasts, including under the NDP party in British Columbia with regards to fishing and logging. So my question would be to you, as Prime Minister, what would you do to ensure Indigenous rights and title are finally respected in this country?
I really appreciate
Amazing
the question.
question.
First of all, we need to respect
I missed the beginning
Indigenous
part of it.
treaty
I did
land
too.
rights.
I think I got the
That's a
general
fundamental
idea,
step
though.
towards walking the path of reconciliation in a real meaningful way. But you mentioned the RCMP, and I got to talk about the really sad reality that there's been violence, heavy-handed violence against Indigenous communities, against peaceful protesters, and I have long called for reform of policing. When
They're probably
I was
talking
in
about the
provincial
old-growth
level, I fought
forest
against
protests in
carting.
BC.
I've continued to use every platform I have to say we've got to stop the use of force. We've got to overview it. We've got to change the RCMP's mandate. And that's something we can do at the federal level. That's something that Mr. Trudeau said he would do and yet has yet to do. And it's something I'm committed to making sure happens.
Okay.
Mr. O'Toole, next question's for you. You know, you voted against the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People that would share decision-making power with Indigenous people over what happens on their land, and you also want to criminalize Indigenous dissent that's expressed through blockades or protests. So the question is, if you were Prime Minister, how could Canada build a respectful nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous people?
Thank you, Ms. Ridgen. And this goes very similar to Mr. McLeod's question on trust and respect. I want to build those partnerships. And that's why our only concern with the United Nations Declaration was how free and prior informed consent was defined so that it didn't stop partnerships from being formed. I'm really glad to say one of the early leaders behind the UN Declaration, Chief Willie Littlechild, has agreed to serve as a special counsel to me on the implementation of that to make sure that there are partnerships and opportunities. What I want to do as Prime Minister is build that type of nation-to-nation dialogue and partnership so that the next generation has intergenerational wealth and opportunity transfer, not trauma. And building that trust will be core to me. It's why, as I said, my first question was on reconciliation. We have
if only he didn't dodge the.
All right, thank you.
If only he didn't dodge the question about making protests illegal, which is what we've done in Alberta here. Not good.
I will be here to do my best to keep you on time, and all of you have an opportunity to jump in after Mr. Trudeau begins with a question from Melissa.
Okay, I think if there's one thing that Canadians and Indigenous people can all agree upon, it is that this Indian system is not working for anybody. How would you dismantle this broken top-down system, and what would you replace it with that would ensure that
this is a really good
still
question.
living up to,
This is a really good question.
Its constitutional obligations to Indigenous people?
First of all, we are looking forward to dismantling the Indian Act. It is a commitment of ours, but it is not something that Ottawa gets to decide. And what replaces the Indian Act will vary from community to community as we live up to our obligations.
That does sound like a good answer.
Over the years, as we've moved towards self-government, we have accompanied
it's kind of true,
it needs to be that way. It can't be any other way.
Health, some who want to start with education, some who want to start with economic development. Every community, every nation across this country gets to help define what its path is forward. We will be there to listen, to partner, to build a better future every step of the way.
The way to go forward is to listen
Liberals
to
with the strong foot there.
Mr. Trudeau ignored one that he had in his own cabinet in Jody Wilson-Raybould. That was a huge lost opportunity. We've been speaking to people with how we can accelerate treaty resolution. There are some treaty negotiations, Ms. Ridgen, that have been going on, as you probably know, for decades. We need to solve it, and we need to work with Indigenous leaders. There's incredible Indigenous leaders in nonprofits, in the private sector, in industry, in academia. We need to use that governance capacity to finalize treaties and build partnerships.
Yeah, they like to focus on that a lot.
The best way forward is success for Indigenous.
It's all about integration, you know, with the Conservatives.
The Conservatives have taken a hard key to private sector.
One point, I think absolutely the solution has to be Indigenous-led. And I think that's the starting point. And for a long time, we've seen that there's been a top-down approach that has to change. It has to be Indigenous people at the table. But I want to talk about the impacts, so just we understand how severe this is, how the Indian Act is creating injustice and perpetuating injustice. I spoke to Bee, who's a young woman, a young girl who lives in Niskandiga. And she told me in her own voice, she said, I'm a 12-year-old girl and I'm fighting for clean drinking water. How does that make any sense? Those words haunt me to this day. I think about what 12-year-olds do, and they certainly aren't fighting for clean drinking water. That is a legacy. That is the impact of the Indian Act.
I want to go back to what Mr. O'Toole has been saying, because he's very able at saying all the right things, but there are countless examples of him actually not living up to his words. We've seen him on a number of times during this campaign, but on Indigenous issues specifically. He says we need to listen to Indigenous peoples. Well, he proposed that he would raise the flags that are at half-mast for the kids in unmarked graves in residential schools. And he didn't talk to or listen to any Indigenous leaders when he made that decision. And that's something that is important and symbolic, but wouldn't cost a cent. How do we believe that he would be able to actually make the investment earlier necessary?
Hold on. I'm going to give Ms. Paul and Mr. Blanchet a chance to jump in. We haven't heard from them yet. Time permitting, I'll come back to you, Mr. O'Toole.
And I really, again, want to
I asked Mr. Trudeau to move immediately.
Hold on, Ms. Paul.
I really just want to try to recenter our conversation on Indigenous peoples and what we are going to do to fulfill the many unfulfilled promises and commitments that have been made. And I would say, perhaps,
she says
to
that
pick
she's
up
going
on,
to, like,
what has been said, that it
say what
seems
she's been saying all
too
night, I'm
often
going to be a little
that,
disappointed.
reconciliation is treated like a buffet. You can opt in for this, pick this plate, but not the other one. And that applies to what we've seen with Mr. Trudeau and the Liberals. You can't, on the one hand, say reconciliation and then go and not allow Mi'kmaq fishers to be able to have a decent, moderate living for all of these years.
Oh, that's so true.
You can't
Yeah.
call reconciliation and then take Indigenous peoples to court. But Mr. Singh,
Yeah, the
you
Mi'kmaq
also
stuff
can't
happened
say
under the Liberal
reconciliation
government.
and then support the
Unacceptable.
NDP government and putting pipelines through Indigenous territories, or support Line 5 after the Anishinaabe made it very clear that they did not support that project.
Ms. Paul, I'm going to allow Mr. Blanchette to get in. He's been signaling he wants to.
Yes.
I will come back to the two of you. Mr. Blanchette.
First Nations and Quebec have something in common. They are binded by a document they never signed. And any relationship between nations should be dealt with freely signed treaties or agreements or something. The Indian Act has to be replaced one nation at a time, if need be.
Okay, great.
By and with freely signed treaties and agreement. There's no other way. And if I may come back a few seconds on something else. Quebec wants religion out of the state affairs because religion never protected equality for women and never will.
That's a good answer, I
I'm
think.
going to give you both a chance to briefly respond.
So the Bloc,
Mr.
the Liberals, and the
O'Toole, Mr.
NDP
Singh,
sound to be
briefly,
like
please.
all on about the
I
same
am proud
page
of this
about
country.
this.
And I think
To me.
if you love your country, you can dig deep to make it better. So as Prime Minister on the National Day of Reconciliation on September 30th, I will raise the flag with a commitment to move forward on calls to action. Mr. Trudeau promises things, doesn't deliver, and then when people protested him, he mocked them. That is not reconciliation. So you can be proud of your country as you strive for it to get better.
Thank you, Mr. O'Toole. Mr. Singh, briefly.
I think that Mr. Trudeau may care. I think he cares. But the reality is that he's often done a lot of things for show and hasn't backed those up with real action. And the harm is that Indigenous people continue to suffer. And that's what I want to stop. I want to stop the suffering and lift up Indigenous people by being
5
allies.
seconds, Mr.
working
Trudeau,
with
then
them.
we got to go. Mr. Trudeau, 5 seconds.
Unfortunately, the cynicism that Mr. Singh is showing on saying we did nothing is harming reconciliation and the path we're moving forward. We have lots more to do, and we are doing it.
All right, leaders, thank you. Thank you, Melissa.
Merci, merci.
Marcy.
And now it is time for our fourth theme for the night, affordability.
I really wish
It's time now to
that
bring in
Jagmeet
Janet
would
Falla. She
maybe
is a
come out, like,
senior
guns
working
blazing, or come out
part-time in
stronger.
Burlington, Ontario.
Yeah.
Good evening, Janet. Please tell us what your question is to the leaders.
I don't know.
I don't mind him like bringing out being honest and saying that Justin Trudeau probably does care. I do like that, but yeah, there's some other areas where he could come out a little better for sure.
Live where I do, so I'd like to know when they become Prime Minister, what will they do to help us seniors survive?
Thank you, Janet. Leaders, you've heard Janet's question. We're starting
Yeah, Canadian
with you,
debates
Mr.
are much
Blanchet.
less mudslinging
Merci,
than
madame.
U.S. debates for sure. It is nice in a way.
Now,
We do focus a
Bloc
little bit more
It's
on
not so much.
policy.
I'm not so much like
demanded
mudslinging. I mean so
for
much
the
like.
government to increase.
We just actually
the
talk
amount
about
of money
policy
they
a lot more
provided
than the U.S.
among-
does.
and
Yeah,
We
I'm
still
saying,
don't
like,
talk about
less-
it enough,
less
though.
statements, less statements, more
It's
answers.
nowhere in the Conservatives program.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the Liberals program, it starts at 75, nothing below 75 for this pension. I'm not sure about the word in English. It has to be done. Those people are those who suffered the most from the pandemic. Their power to buy things was reduced. The fact that they were alone more than ever before was made worse. And the stress, the anxiety they lived with is terrible. We want something to be done, and it has to start with a monthly check, seriously increased.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchet. Mr. O'Toole.
Thank you, Ms.
Okay,
Falla, for the
that's good.
question. This is a crisis facing our country, affordability, and it's hitting our seniors the hardest. That's why in Canada's recovery plan, our plan to give you a break, we're going to double the Canada Workers Benefit. There are many seniors like you having to work to keep up with the cost of living. We're going to double that for you to give you a break. We're going to get bills down for internet, for cellular phone. We're going to get grocery bills down. That is our plan and our commitment. And in December, we're going to give you a break with the GST holiday and help bricks and mortar stores in the process. Mr. Trudeau is borrowing every day $424 million, and he's causing an inflation crisis. We have to secure our future, and that's our commitment to you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Toole. Mr. Trudeau.
Ms. Fallish, thank you so much for your question. We know that seniors have been deeply affected by this pandemic, the isolation, the extra costs, which is why we stepped up with a one-time support so you could help get through this pandemic. But we need longer-term supports. One of the first things we did was increase the guaranteed income supplement for our most vulnerable single seniors when we first got elected. We're doing that again in our proposal in this election. We're also moving forward with increasing the OAS for all seniors over 75 because we recognize that the costs continue to increase as you get older and continue to want to live at home. We're giving you more supports so you can stay at home safely and make those renovations importantly. We will continue to have your backs as we have through this pandemic and into the future.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Singh.
I want to thank you so much for your question. And one of the things that you mentioned is that you didn't think you would have to keep on working. And I don't think our seniors should have to work. If seniors want to contribute by working, that's absolutely their right.
Most based answer thus far.
You shouldn't have had to work. Sure. And in a country as rich as ours, we should make sure our seniors are able to retire with dignity, that you've got the supports necessary to live a life of dignity. So what we're proposing to do is put in place a guaranteed income for seniors so they can live with dignity and not have to worry about paying the bills. That's a starting point. What we've seen so far is that Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole both are going to either cut the help that you receive or put the burden back on people like you. We believe that the ultra-rich should pay their fair share for once and invest in you, invest in families, invest in people.
Thank you,
NDP's
Mr.
answer
Singh,
here
Ms.
killed
Paul.
it.
Thank
That is the best
very,
answer.
very much for the question. And as someone who comes from a family where my grandma and grandfather had to work until actually they were kicked out of working because they needed to keep working to afford the basics, I completely understand what you're saying. And this is an opportunity for us to learn the lessons from this pandemic and to really get to the heart of things and to stop talking about the symptoms, but get to the root causes. We need to have, absolutely, and it's so wonderful to see the consensus building around a guaranteed livable income so that whatever your circumstances, you can live with dignity. We need universal long-term care. That's a huge expense. It was for my family. And we need more affordable housing. Let's get to the root causes.
Cool. She
Thank
built
you,
on it.
Ms. Paul.
That's great.
Mr. Singh and Mr. Blanchet, you will both square
I
off
liked her
now.
answer too.
You both
So
talk about
Singh is pretty close
affordable
to having the right
housing.
answer
We
here.
know
Or not
that
Singh, sorry,
affordability means
Blanchet is
different
pretty
things
close.
to different people
Yeah.
depending
But yeah,
on
definitely the
where
Greens
in
and the NDP.
country they live. So when you talk about affordable housing, who are you really talking about? Per the draw, Mr. Singh, you begin. Mr. Blanchet, you may jump in anytime.
We're talking about people who are spending right now more than half their income on housing. That's not affordable. People should not be spending so much on housing that they have no money left to pay for their groceries, to pay for their bills. And the sad reality is, since 2015 to now, the average cost of
White
housing
lights.
nationally has
I
gone
will
up to buy
ban
a
you
home
from my
by
chat if you continue being racist.
$300,000.
Okay.
So
And
far, the housing crisis has
picking
gotten
on
worse
minorities
over
and
the past
such.
6 years. We want to invest in housing.
Don't.
We want to invest to make it easier to buy your first home and to
Imagine
invest to
being a
make sure there's
racist in
available,
2021.
affordable rental homes.
Let Mr. Blanchet respond.
Could anyone tell me how to translate logement social?
Social housing.
Social housing might be a solution to another problem. People are paying, at least in Quebec,
That's
people
your
are
warning.
paying far too much for houses because the prices have increased tremendously. The idea is to reduce the speed of that increase while helping people who cannot even afford decent lodging. If we build more social lodging, which price are obviously very lower, much lower, then it will lessen the pressure on those houses who become more and more expensive. And it will help reduce this. I wouldn't speak about an inflation crisis, but I would
Sorry,
speak
racist
about
may not be the
an
right word.
inflation
What I
worry,
meant is
which we
discrimination,
must have,
if that's more
at present
appropriate.
times. So I believe one thing might be part of the solution for the other thing when we speak about
All right, Mr. Blanchet, that's time. I'm sorry, Mr. Singh, that's time. You speak about inflation, Mr. Blanchet, and that brings us to our next topic. So, Mr. O'Toole, Mr. Trudeau, and Ms. Paul, you're up. Inflation is at its highest level in a decade, and it is squeezing Canadians on staples such as groceries, gas, rent. What's your message to Canadians who are struggling to make ends meet? Per the draw, you begin, Mr. O'Toole.
Well, unlike Mr. Trudeau, I will care about monetary policy because we need to keep inflation low. There is a crisis hitting families, and Mr. Trudeau seems completely oblivious to that. Bills are going up. There's a housing crisis, as we talked about, and he's making it worse with, as I said, almost $500 million of borrowing per day. There's real risks on the horizon, so we have a plan to get people work, get their bills down, give them a break. Canadians deserve a break and balance the budget over the course of the next decade. That's exactly what we need to fight against Mr. Trudeau's inflation.
Try not to
give families a break.
Anyone.
Ms. Paul.
Try not to interrupt anyone. You know, it's just an excellent question. And if you come to my neighborhood of Toronto Centre, you will see those people living in inadequate housing. You will see people paying more than half of their income just for things like childcare. And you know, there's this expression in my culture where you talk about soon come. It's the things that you delay to tomorrow and tomorrow that should have been done today. This is soon come. Soon come is now. We have got to learn the lessons of the pandemic and make sure that we have a social safety net in place that lets everyone live with dignity. When we invest in our people, we are investing in our future, and this is the time for us to do that. It costs us not to do it.
Over the past year and a half, I made a straightforward promise to Canadians that we would have your backs. And that's what we did. During this pandemic, we were there to support people. But at the same time, we need to continue that. That's why we've put forward a $10 a day childcare proposal that will save the average family in Toronto close to $10,000 more than Mr. O'Toole's approach on childcare, which he would cancel. We also put forward a national housing plan that will invest $4 billion to work with municipalities to create 1.4 million homes.
Mr. O'Toole's
let him respond, Mr. O'Toole. Mr. Trudeau, let Mr. O'Toole respond.
Let me just finish this. Mr. O'Toole's plan on housing gives $500 million on breaks to the wealthiest landlords and nothing for building new houses.
The housing crisis has gotten worse under Mr. Trudeau, and months ago he fought against us trying to take foreign non-resident money out of our housing market. We've got a plan to get rental housing
both making
built.
kind of
We've
good
got a plan
points,
to get density, 1 million new homes in the next 3 years,
with no
and
money
to give
on that
first-time home buyers
not a cent
a break by a
Mr.
longer
O'Toole.
mortgage. And Mr. Trudeau, Canadians are worried you're going to be taxing their primary home sale. Your advisors have said it.
Untrue.
Your candidates have said it. It's on page 14 of his policy book. He's introducing a new tax on the sale of homes.
Leaders, there will be more opportunity to speak about these issues. Thank you, because guess what? I'm bringing out Rosemary Barton of CBC News, and she's going to be asking you more direct questions and opening up more opportunities for debate on this theme of affordability. Hey,
the Liberals' child policy is pretty great.
Everybody, appreciate you being here. Let's try and get some answers this time, shall we?
The Conservatives would definitely fail on that front from their policy approach.
To tackle affordability is a guaranteed livable income. You mentioned it just moments ago. Give people a set amount of money to deal with their lives. There was an expert panel in British Columbia just recently that said that that is not the way forward, that actually is too complicated for the needs of our society, that the needs are too diverse. Why do you think this is still a policy worth pursuing?
Guaranteed livable income is a policy whose time has come. We saw at the beginning of the pandemic how many people were thrown immediately into financial crisis because our patchwork system simply isn't working. There is a growing consensus. The members of the Liberal Party voted for it at their convention. The members of the NDP party voted it at their convention. 50 senators signed a letter calling for it. The time has come to ensure that everyone has the support that they need to live in dignity in this country. The parliamentary budget officer looked at guaranteed livable income. He examined the model in Ontario, and here's what he said. He said that it would lift half of the people who are in poverty now out of it, that it was affordable, and that it would not disincentivize work. This is the time for a guaranteed livable income. Let's do it together.
That's time. Thank you.
Mr. O'Toole, childcare, as you know, is a huge expense for families.
I do like it a lot. I wonder why it only lifts half of the people out of poverty, though.
Fees by 50%
why not all? Why does that not lift all? It should lift all.
Because there are
and
people
eventually
that
will
are
reduce fees to $10.
not able
Instead,
to
you're proposing a
be
tax
lifted out.
credit
Maybe
that would
the other
reimburse
50%
just
is maybe
some
like
families.
homeless people. They'd still be in poverty, but they might not be homeless anymore.
Well, the UBI should be enough to cover that, right? So clearly, maybe the UBI amount is not enough.
Yes, but I feel like if any of our candidates tried to come up with a UBI, they would get laughed off stage.
It depends. The Liberals were largely considering it, actually.
Lower income families
who are in power right
with
now.
up to
So
75% of the cost. Our plan will also help that nurse on shift schedules that has jobs in the evening, that needs flexibility. What we want to do is help all families get ahead
But
and
if the
provide
nurse
more
can't find a
support
spot,
for the
Mr.
lower
O'Toole,
income.
what does she do? If the nurse can't find a spot, what does she
This
do with her
gives her
children?
as much flexibility as possible. If there's not one in her suburban community, there is no space in 5 years under Mr. Trudeau's program. We want to give families the tools to make the best decision for the position they're in now, to have ability to help them in their circumstances. Our plan will be immediate. It will help all Canadian families.
Mr. Singh, you're promising to tackle skyrocketing housing prices. One of the ways is with that 20% tax on the sale of homes to foreign buyers. 2/3 of Canadian families actually own a home already. If you're successful at cooling the housing market, that would mean that people who have invested their life savings in their homes may not have it anymore. They're relying on that for their retirement. So what is more important to you? Helping younger people get access to the market, or allowing older Canadians who rely on the value of their homes to live?
It's a really fair question. And
This
when
is a
I
hard
spoke
question.
to people,
Yeah.
I go door to door in my riding of Burnaby, people who've got beautiful homes. I ask them, what's the number one concern? They say housing. And I kind of look around at their house and say, well, you've got a home. They say, well, I'm not worried for myself. I've got a place, but I'm worried about my kids. And they're more concerned that their kids will never be able to find a home than their own circumstances, because they're okay. They are worried about their kids. And the reality is, it is impossible for young people to even imagine buying a home, let alone renting a place that's in their budget. So we've got to get the big money out of housing. Young people, young families, professionals
So your
shouldn't have to
answer is
compete.
that your answer is that it is more important for young people to get into the housing market rather than protect people who have equity in their home
We can
now?
do both. And our plan is
Okay,
that
good.
Everyone's telling us the number one concern they have
But
for
how?
their kids is that they're not sure they're ever going to be able to own a home. We want to change that. It's gotten worse with Mr. Trudeau. We're going to fix it.
That doesn't tell us how. Tell us
I
how.
think the answer is really easy,
Seniors,
right?
as
You
were
just
talking about off the
build
top,
more
they're
homes.
really
I mean, I know
worried
that's
about
not
the increased
easy,
cost
but
of living. You,
the
as
answer
you said,
in that way
have
is easy.
criticized the Liberals for increasing old age security only for those 75 and older. But statistics show time and again that older seniors are less likely to have employment income, and they actually have higher health expenses. So why should an increase in seniors go to all seniors instead of those who need it most?
First, let's say that this prime minister is supposed to be the champion who fights against all kinds of discrimination, and he did create himself two classes of elder seniors. What they want is for those between 65 and 75 to spend their private funds in the meantime.
No, but I've just given you the example about why. I've just
will-
given you the example about why the government may have done that, sir. It's because people
may
who
I
are 65
propose
to
my own
75.
answer, please?
May I follow up, please? That those people generally stay employed and generally have fewer health costs.
Those people have worked all their lives until 65 years old. They have paid for a pension that should be the same for everybody. And for some financial issues, the government creates two classes of seniors. It is unacceptable, and no calculation whatsoever should be so unethical.
All right, thank you, Mr.
I
Blanchet.
think
We are
I
now
agree with what he's
moving to
saying
the
if he's
open debate.
arguing
I just
against
have a question for Mr. Trudeau, I believe.
the
If you don't mind. I don't think we should let him off the hook. I think we would all agree.
I got a little
what's the
mixed
word?
up there.
Making some of our arguments.
No,
on
no.
the
only
Let's-
helping people
well,
who are
we'll
like
make you
really vulnerable
uncomfortable.
as
There we
seniors.
go.
You said in 2019 that Canadians should never have to make the, and these are your words, impossible choice between paying for medications or putting food on the table. We have seen you, particularly in these recent months, willing to spend billions of dollars on programs that matter to your government. Daycare would be another example of that. Why is there no money in your platform or in your most recent budget for a national pharmacare program?
Ooh,
is it
yeah.
no longer
Where
a
is it?
priority? And should you not just tell Canadians that, sir?
No, it continues to be a priority because, indeed, no one should have to choose between paying for groceries and medications. On health investments, we were all focused on COVID-19 and supporting the provinces and making sure that on that we were giving the support we needed so we could have Canadians' backs. But at the same time, we worked with a number of different jurisdictions, and we've actually signed with Prince Edward Island a national universal pharmacare.
You've signed one deal, sir, but there's nothing in your platform in terms of costing. I understand the pandemic kept you busy. What about going forward? Why wouldn't you put that in place?
We are going to continue to.
I like her.
We know that it's
Continue
not
is not
something
do.
She should be the fucking moderator.
With
True.
Prince Edward Island, we're going to continue to do with others in respect of the provincial jurisdiction that is delivery of health care. We can't impose pharmacare on a province that doesn't want it, unlike the NDP proposes. We are going to work in partnership, as we have on so many things, to get it done like we did on childcare.
Okay, and now we're going to move to open debate. Starting back with you, Rosie.
Okay, and we start here, I believe, with Monsieur Blanchette.
That's correct.
So, Mr. Blanchette, what is one policy change that you think would make the biggest difference to Canadians or Quebecers, in your case, in terms of their cost of living? The one change that you would like to see that would help them the most?
Cost of living, that's quite interesting because that's a worry that we have. We believe that the most important thing is changing the way we create wealth. We believe that transforming our own resources, natural resources, with our own clean energy in our regions of Quebec will create more wealth. This wealth will come from an environmental, I will get this word, environmental preoccupation
He's doing good.
As well.
You're trying, buddy.
We will do that, and we should be entitled to do that with our part of the money that is being sent again and again in oil and gas. There's one thing I want to add, even if it's not exactly, I don't know if there's time eventually.
Not really, but quickly.
I will take a few of those seconds.
Yes.
Will we have some seconds to speak about French-speaking communities and Acadians?
Well, not in this
debate?
section. This is about cost of living, sir.
And
no,
to you,
nowhere.
Mr. Singh.
It's nowhere. That's my problem. It's nowhere.
One of the things we know, that cost of living has gone up. Cost of medication is going up.
They got two
Cost
French
of being
debates
able to
with
afford
Quebec being a
medication
huge
keeps you
focus
healthy.
on them.
Mr. Trudeau, $0 in your fully costed budget means zero commitment to getting it done.
You don't have a fully costed
$0, but you've shown your evidence with your costed budget. You've shown Canadians clearly you've got no interest in doing something that you promised to do
in your
2 years ago.
Mr. Singh.
You promised to do it 2 years ago. You
Answer for it, Trudeau.
You campaigned on it. You included it in your throne speech, and now you've completely abandoned it. How can people trust any promise you make when there's $0 in your plan?
Okay, brief response, then Ms. Paul, then I'm
Where's
coming
my
to you,
pharmacare?
Briefly, Ms. Paul.
$25 billion in our fully costed platform for health for the priorities that Canadians have told us on. Better support for seniors in care, better support for mental health services across the country, particularly for young people, and access to a primary care doctor or team. That is what $25 billion over the next 4 years gives. Mr. O'Toole's money for health is backloaded to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years from now.
All right, Mr. Trudeau, thank you, Ms. Paul.
I'm reminded what the question was. The question was what policy would have the biggest impact on people's cost of living?
Ms. Paul.
And I think that we have a perfect example of this again here, because the biggest thing that could make a difference in the cost of living for people is a change in the culture in Ottawa. It is so painful for me because I've had the experience of, again, having my grandparents work until they were 75 and living 600 and 800 square feet and wondering how we were going to feed ourselves some nights. I've had that experience, and I know that 1 day of delay is too much. So when I think that we could have been in Parliament now working to get people the help that they need.
What is the policy, Ms. Paul? These
policy,
are anecdotes. What is the
policy? It's not an anecdote. The thing that we need is a change in the culture.
I see you, Mr.
It's a change in the culture because there are several parties on this platform right now that agree on guaranteed livable income and universal pharmacare and childcare. But it's always soon come. It's always soon come.
All right, thank you, Ms. Paul. Mr. O'Toole, you've been waiting. I'm going to get you in.
We're doubling the Canadian workers' benefit. That amounts to $1 per hour raise for working families. These are people working very hard, and I respect whether they get up.
I don't really like his policy solution.
In a restaurant or work to open their small business.
It just means seniors have to keep working if they can't if they don't have enough money from their pensions, which is fucked. Working 65 years or whatever. I guess you wouldn't be working 65, but 55 years or whatever the fuck it is. When you math it out.
If you start working at 14, you'd be working 51 years.
And actually, most of our seniors were born in the generation that like helped their families on farms. They've been working since they were like 5 years old.
Yeah, I've been theoretically, I've been working since I was like 8.
A plan to get
them. By the way, Mr. O'Toole, I won't take
it's unacceptable. The seniors shouldn't have to work. I don't like his policy.
You're beholden to the gun lobby. We're beholden to anti-vaxxers. You're beholden to a
remember,
range of
this is affordability, and Mr. Trudeau, I'm sorry, we're out of time now,
I've
sir.
Been responding to people. Can I answer Rosie's question directly?
You have 5 seconds, sir.
We were able to lift 1 million people out of poverty and create a
damn straight homeless
at the same time with the right kinds of investments over the past 5 years.
And Mr. Trudeau, I'm sorry, sir, I have to wrap you right there because it is now time for our next theme on COVID recovery. Rosie, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Oh no, don't leave. Please don't leave. Oh, she was so good.
Rosie was fucking based.
Oh man. That was the spice we needed.
Okay, from Saskatchewan, Ethan Herman is standing by in Saskatoon. He's an undecided
from
voter,
Saskatchewan
and he wants to hear from you about COVID recovery. Hey, Ethan, go ahead.
Hey, good evening, leaders. My question is this. Coming out of this pandemic, how will you, if elected as Prime Minister, going to unify and drive Canada forward with respect to healthcare, jobs in the economy, and ensuring a higher quality of life is achievable for all Canadians, regardless of race, color, creed, or sexual orientation?
All right, leaders, you've heard from Ethan. Mr. O'Toole, you're up first.
It's a good fucking question. That's a loaded question, too.
That is exactly why I launched Canada's recovery plan on the first day of the campaign. We're going to create 1 million jobs in 1 year. We're going to clean up the accountability mess in Ottawa. We're going to have national leadership on mental health. We're going to be more ready for a pandemic, and we're going to get our finances under control. I want to get people working. I want to give families a break. And since the moment I became Conservative leader, I've been reaching out, whatever your background, your faith, your color, your sexual orientation, whether you're Indigenous, whether you're a new Canadian, you're important to Canada's recovery, and you're important to the Conservative Party. And I'd ask you to look at Canada's recovery plan. After these 18 months as a country, we need a plan and a leader that will actually deliver.
Thank you, Ms. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. And I swear I did not line up that question. He's not a ringer. But this really comes to the heart of the matter, which again is about changing the culture of politics in Ottawa. We have heard from outgoing MPs in the last Parliament how incredibly important that is, that the culture has become toxic, that has become hyper-partisan. And, there used to be a time, I worked as an intern in a nonpartisan way in the Ontario legislature. You would make a fuss and question period, and then you'd get to work across party lines and committees to find the solutions to help people in Canada. And so we need less partisanship. We need more diverse
I do really like her
voices
position
so
on
that we can
working
get
together
to the best
across
ideas
party
in a more
lines. I think that
cooperative
is
and collaborative
really
way.
important.
Yeah, I mean, look at how the COVID-19 pandemic went for us. That's why we got what we got, because we had unprecedented teamwork.
Healthcare is something very near and dear to my heart. And we've seen in this pandemic that our healthcare system simply hasn't been there. And it's not because of the
Drake for
pandemic.
president.
A lot of these problems were there from before. So our commitment is to invest in our healthcare system, to defend it. Unlike Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole, who believe in private long-term care delivery, we want to get out profit, get out the greed from the delivery of long-term care. We want to invest in pharmacare for all, not promise it in 2019 and then have $0 to commit towards it. We want to see everyone have access to medication. We want to include dental care into our healthcare system and mental health services.
Jagmeet, you're not letting me down on backpedaling onto previous points. I do enjoy that, but I wish you would move on and give more.
Ethan, I think the folks on the stage
that last
missed
part.
the very
More
first part of your
solutions,
question,
less
which
attacks.
is, once we get out of this pandemic, and yes, we have plans for being even more
I just want to
ambitious
see
on
policy
climate change
solutions
and
for
making
sure.
sure people get good jobs. But we have to get out of this pandemic first. And that's why the unequivocal leadership that we've shown as a government on making sure that everyone gets vaccinated is what's going to get us through. We cannot rebuild the economy until we get through this pandemic. And unfortunately, Mr. O'Toole, who says he wants to get all of Canada vaccinated to 90% in the coming 2 months, can't even convince his own candidates to get vaccinated to 90%. We have to get through this. We are.
Oh man, that's gonna bite Mr. O'Toole in the ass.
I know Trudeau's harped on that one, but it's a good point, and it's very important.
It is. It really is.
You can't like say that you're for this and allow your party to completely undermine you.
Is a jurisdiction of the provinces and Quebec.
100%.
Those are the territories, the jurisdictions who should have the resources to do their job. The promises of the Conservatives is 3.5% of increase a year for the first 3 years, which is very far from what the provinces asked for. And what the provinces asked for is not even in the program of Mr. Trudeau. So it will be hard to be efficient if those who are responsible of healthcare do not have the resources which are owed to them.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchette. Thanks, Ethan.
I was reading up a little bit more about the healthcare stuff that he was just talking about, Blanchette there. He's completely correct.
Ms. Paul and Mr. Singh to go face to face, starting with Ms. Paul. And I want to talk about Canada's parallel pandemic, the opioid crisis. Since it has taken hold, more than 20,000 Canadians have died, often in the shadows. This is an insidious killer that is tearing families apart. To both of you, starting with Ms. Paul, does the political will exist to confront it?
We called many times during the last session of Parliament across party lines again for us to first recognize that this was a national health emergency and then to decriminalize simple possession because we know we need to end the stigma and create a national safe supply program. We asked every party to do it because 17 lives on average are being lost every day. We didn't hear anything from anyone. And it comes back to Mr. Herman's question about unity. Can we not unify on something like this where it's clear what we need to do? If we can't do that, then none of these other things are possible. And so that's what we have to try to do.
We definitely need to respond to this crisis with everything we have. We've long called for it to be declared a national public health emergency. And what we know is the approach that has been taken for decades simply doesn't work. The approach of arresting someone, putting them through the criminal justice system, putting them in jail does not make communities safer, and it doesn't help people. So we have been saying, and I believe very firmly, we need to provide healthcare responses to people that are dealing with addiction. We need to make sure we are doing everything we can to secure a safe supply. We need to look at the evidence and say really clearly, if there is any step we can take that'll save lives, we've got to take it.
Well, so there's a lot to do, but does the political will exist to do it?
That is exactly the question. Is there the political will?
There is,
will we
on behalf of New
there
Democrats.
doesn't seem to be because we need a national safe supply program. We wanted it before Parliament dissolved, and here we are, and lives will be lost in my riding of Toronto.
Well, I got the will.
I got the will.
All right, Ms. Paul, I have to wrap you there. It's good to hear, Mr. Singh, that it is at least coming from you. Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Blanchette, Mr. O'Toole, this round to you. Starting with Mr. Trudeau. During the pandemic, Canadians watched in horror the suffering of their most vulnerable and frail loved ones in long-term care. What if tomorrow you had to place a family member in a long-term care facility? Would you do it? Beginning with you, Mr. Trudeau, Mr. O'Toole, Mr. Blanchette, you may jump in.
Tomorrow's my mom's 73rd birthday.
He doesn't seem happy about that question.
Something we're reflecting on, but she's doing wonderfully right now. We won't have to make that decision right now. Don't worry, Mom. The reality is we've heard from seniors across this country who've been tremendously worried through this pandemic, and family members worried about that. We know that the conditions of work for the people who are in those long-term care homes are often dictating the conditions of care for seniors, which is why we propose to hire 50,000 new personal support workers, working with the provinces with the money for that. Also increasing the minimum salary to $25 an hour for people who care for our elders and most vulnerable. Because
so if you
I like that.
put mom in long-term care, you would do it?
I would make sure that, yes, that they are people who are properly well cared and that there is enough of a proportionate.
Mr.
And that's where we will work with the provinces to deliver
kind of an
exactly
answer.
that, because we put real money.
I feel like Mr. Blanchette kind of got left behind there.
This is where we need
He was motioning
for
there.
long-term care for the CHSLD.
He'll probably get his
Quebec.
last
We're gonna
say in
have
it, I'm
a $3
guessing.
billion fund that the provinces can draw on for infrastructure upgrades to long-term care. That's in addition to our record
$3 billion
almost
is not
$60
that
billion
much.
commitment over 10 years
Yeah, I don't think that's
to the
addressing
public
the issue.
healthcare system. Universal access with no conditions. We need
But it's probably important.
10 years with the Conservatives, I
not
hate
create
that.
fights.
Yeah.
And long-term care learning.
Yeah,
from
that's the thing.
gaps
That's the
in
huge thing with
first
their
part of this
policies too.
pandemic
Is it's
is
all
something we
about
need.
they
And I
need to
have
win
to
multiple
address-
elections to do anything.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
have a grandmother in one, and we've been in touch with her. But I have to touch on what Mr. Trudeau said about the recovery. We have to get through the pandemic first. Why did you not have that approach to the election, Mr. Trudeau? We're in the fourth wave. Everything in the recovery relates to getting out of the pandemic first. Why didn't we work
Mr. Blanchette, I'm going to let Mr. Blanchette in.
You have had 4 minutes more than I did. So now I think it's enough. The debate is almost over. Some dads and some moms don't have to worry. They will have the money, of course. Some do. And in order to give them the care they need, the care they deserve, those responsible for those cares, provinces and Quebec, should have, without conditions, because it is their responsibility, their knowledge, their expertise, the resources required. When the Army came in Quebec, they wrote a report afterward. What did they say? They did not say Quebec is not good enough to take care of its seniors. They said they lacked resources. They lacked the money.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchette. Leaders, we are starting to get at. We're running out of time. I am sorry, Mr. Trudeau. You've had the most time tonight. I'm sorry, Mr. Trudeau. We are now moving on to our final journalist of the night. I am welcoming Evan Solomon from
muted, motherfucker.
He's going to be putting questions to you on COVID recovery, starting with Mr. Singh. Hey, Evan.
Hi, Shachi, and hi, leaders. Good to see all of you. Mr. Singh, I'll start with you, sir. Your pandemic recovery plan is uncosted. You have no plan to balance the books, but you promised to pay for your expensive promises, new programs like universal dental care with taxing the super rich and taxing corporations. What specifically would you do to create the 1 million jobs you're promising and make sure Canada stays competitive?
We have the only credible
infrastructure.
Plan.
Hit them with the infrastructure. Hit them with the infrastructure.
It's not going to put the burden back on the same people that have struggled.
You know how many jobs you create with infrastructure? It's out the fucking roof.
Yeah,
clearly,
and our infrastructure needs it.
Billionaires, we would make sure companies like Amazon start paying their fair share so we can invest in those new jobs, so we can invest in people. Left to Mr. Trudeau or Mr. O'Toole, they are going to put the burden back on you. They've already started. Mr. Trudeau has already started by cutting the CRE. Cutting help to people.
But what new programs, sir, specifically?
Well, I believe in making sure we invest in pharmacare, we invest in dental care, we invest in retrofitting homes and buildings. In doing this, we're going to lower the cost of living, help people save money, but also create jobs by investing in the future economy, the economy of the future.
All right, Mr. Trudeau, to you. Only 4 months ago, you released
He said it's infrastructure. That was kind of beating around the bush of infrastructure by retrofitting homes and
it's the same concept,
all
yeah.
that stuff. But it just say infrastructure.
Yeah. Numbers are down. Now you got a new plan that
infrastructure is a dirty liberal and conservative word. Ew.
How do Canadians trust that these new massive spending promises will not just keep growing in another few months? And what do you say to the next generation who say, how are we going to pay for this?
Nice seeing you, homeless. Have a good night. And 13 Army. Homeless sends hugs and kisses.
Oh, thanks, homeless.
Very good.
Much
have
love.
a good night.
Hope you have a good night. And definitely hop by the stream. Next time. I loved having you last time.
Hell yeah.
Being there because that
Thanks for
is
popping
the
by.
best way to ensure
I really want to pause
strong
this
recovery.
debate so I can
Now, yes,
really
our
lay into
budget
the fucking
showed
infrastructure
our
point.
ambition for this country,
I know.
including
Do you want to pause it? We can pause it if we pause it at the same time.
But we also
3,
shows a
2,
responsible fiscal
1.
track.
It's fine. I paused at 19 seconds on the clock. For my infrastructure point, it's such an easy thing for him to say infrastructure. He would have just said have the balls to say infrastructure because when you yes, infrastructure can be a broad term, but that's why it's so useful for you as a politician. Oh, how are you going to create 1 million jobs? Infrastructure. Our country needs infrastructure.
I wonder if his answer actually was infrastructure, but it was the proper framing of infrastructure. Because if you say infrastructure is a liberal or conservative, you're generally just talking about like the bare minimum of upkeep. But when we're talking about it from a progressive standpoint, what we mean is that we want to invest in green energy and transitioning everything to green energy in that way, right?
He talked about retrofitting homes. It's cool.
Exactly, retrofitting.
That's a step. You need to go above and beyond that. You can't just oh yeah, we plan on retrofitting homes. It's cool. How are you going to do that?
I think the main problem with it is that infrastructure, when you use that word, it sounds big and grand, and you can easily connect the dots of infrastructure to 1 million jobs, right? But when you say retrofitting homes, it doesn't sound like that many jobs. So you need to really reframe it and talk about updating all of our technology to green energy, right, on a huge scale.
That's the thing.
A big
I
move.
say that as someone who works in the industry of people who are going to be retrofitting homes. I work at a plumbing electrical wholesaler. I sell these tools to the contractors who are going to be going into retrofit these homes. Did you know that there was a rebate for you to use pretty much for you to take out your hot water tank and put in a more efficient one and to do all these retrofits into your home? There was a federally mandated rebate that got pulled.
That wasn't federal. That was provincial, I think.
No.
Are you sure? Because
it was paid out provincial, but it came from the federal reserves.
But that's the problem though. That unfortunately, the problem there isn't that the federal government took the money back. It's that our provincial government is robbing it from us. Because the same thing happened in the electrical industry. Right before Kenny came in, when I was working as an electrician, there was rebates for changing your lighting into LED lighting. And once we transitioned into the UCP provincially, we got fucked. They scrapped it actually. They literally scrapped it and didn't replace it with anything useful. So there's the incentive to change is gone. Now I could be wrong. It might be more federal, but it seems to me, I know that the UCP specifically dug their hand into that and fucked with our rebates. So I wouldn't doubt if that was also provincial as well. But yeah, no, for sure, you're totally right. And this is where I almost feel if it is the case that the federal government funds that, they should not even be letting the provinces dictate that. They should just be making the rebate a federal rebate. Don't. If the federal because if the provincial government fucks with it, what does it mean to me if Trudeau gets in power and he says he's going to have rebates for cars and stuff, right, and everything to change our industry over to something more green, and then the provincial government just doesn't allow the money to go through, right? You can't allow the provincial governments to stopgap you, or else your whole plan is fucking useless.
And they've talked a lot about jurisdiction tonight, which I think really kind of pisses me off. Yes, to some extent, you have to respect jurisdiction that exists, and you need to not impose on it. But if your provincial governments are fucking with your federal plans of rebates, something like the UCP has done, you need to step forward and slap them on the wrist.
Yeah, you just can't allow it. If you just look at our gas emissions, for example, right? If in how Trudeau forced the carbon tax on Alberta after we took it away, right? That's the exact kind of heavy-handedness that is required from a federal government in order to make the progress. That you will not be able to reach your emission targets unless everybody participates. You can't let Alberta not participate, right?
Exactly.
And it's the same thing across the board, and especially in this debate with pharmacare, that's the huge thing, because Trudeau used the cop-out of if the provinces don't want to do the pharmacare, then we can't. It's you're gonna have to figure out a way, right? You're gonna have to, there's got to be a way. There's no way that there's no levers they can pull.
Yeah, literally. Well, 100%. Also, the part of the reason why I want to pause it here is I do have to go. I streamed an extra hour past my regular stream time.
Sure. Yeah. Is it late now? It's getting late, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 9 o'clock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. No worries.
So I definitely have to be heading out. But I am definitely interested with so far that we've seen tonight from the federal debate. I will probably watch the rest of it tomorrow or over on the weekend. But before I do go, for everyone that hasn't checked their mail to see if they have gotten their
Your voter
So
registration slip.
Yeah,
I
your
think,
voter
right?
registration.
Yeah.
Check the mail. Make sure you register to vote. You can do it online. You can do it beforehand.
And
If you don't have
early
time,
voting starts tomorrow, guys. It starts
yes,
tomorrow for
yes.
4 days.
Voting. Yeah, early voting starts tomorrow. So and if you can't vote online and you can't vote early, that's fine. And you need to register in person, that's fine. But make sure you have all your proper documentation.
Yeah.
That's gonna be a huge thing. But in all seriousness, please vote. And I'm not going to advocate who you should vote for. I think it's very clear who me and Novus are planning to vote for, just from watching the election.
Yeah,
But we're
I
not
mean,
advocating.
for sure.
We're not advocating for anyone to vote for any one person. Vote for who you think's platform aligns with you the best, because
For
that's
sure.
what it boils down to. Don't worry about split votes. Um, because if you're afraid that oh well, if maybe the liberals mostly get voted in for in my area, right? So there's no point in voting conservative,
Mhm.
right? Your one vote could make all the difference.
Yeah, it definitely could, for sure.
And that works for any party. And
And you should vote strategically if you can. But yeah, for sure, like vote splitting and stuff is not like as big of a deal. I do think this is definitely the election to vote NDP. If you've ever been on the
I am in
fence
agreement.
before about it,
If
if you've ever thought that vote splitting was a problem before and stuff, I do think this is the one where we can really shine for sure, and give a little bit more power in that direction. So
yeah, I was kind of hoping that we would have started streaming at 6, because I would have liked to go over each of the parties' platforms.
Oh yeah, well, we could do that on another stream, if you want.
Yeah,
there's
I
probably
stream on Sundays, so
yeah. There's normally like I'll see if I can find a comparison chart thing, because sometimes they'll have like a list of like all of the policy things and then where each party stands on each policy, and it's a really good way to just get like a really quick answer for like all of your policy stuff, which is really important. That's really the big difference here, guys. Right? Like the debates are a lot of rhetoric and stuff, right? But I've been really focusing on wanting policy answers in this debate, and that's the really important stuff. Is what are they actually going to do, right? So.
that's fair.
Yeah.
I think also another thing that I didn't mention, but I do think that Jagmeet is a really good leader. It might not be proven so much in the debates, but he could also just not be good at debates. Like that could be a weak point that he has that should be addressed. Like if you're going to be a leader, you should be good at debating. I believe that wholeheartedly, but not everyone's perfect. Right?
For sure,
And
yeah.
I'm not trying to pander towards the NDP to to be like, oh well, he just has this one flaw, so let's like look past that. That's not what I'm trying to do. But personally, looking at his platform, it really aligns with me as an individual.
Absolutely,
and the
yeah.
things that I face with on a day-to-day problem. I also have to give props to
Blanchet.
Mr. Blanchet. Yeah, Mr. Blanchet.
I think he's the star of this so far.
I think he's been killing it in the debates. I do think that some of his answers are a little lackluster, to say the least. And I think he does need to have some accountability on Quebec for some major issues that they face.
Social
Mostly
issues
with
are where
racism.
social issues exactly is where they fail the hardest. But environmental, oh my God, to a T.
Yeah,
absolutely
correct. And I will say that I do really, and I said it earlier, I do really enjoy Mrs. Paul's stances on open party line support.
Yeah.
I think the reason why Mr. Blanchet is really good at environmental stuff because he was an environmental minister.
Yeah.
Right?
Likely.
It makes sense that's why he's good at that. There's no reason that, someone with that expertise shouldn't be looked at.
Yeah, exactly. Communication with him, he should be taken very seriously, for sure.
Right? 100%. And I'm not entirely sure what Mr. O'Toole brings. I'd have to look at the conservative platform.
The best thing I could say the conservatives bring is that they will have really good criticism of things, but the problem is that their solutions are never actually. That's the issue with conservatives always. Like we can usually always agree on like what is wrong, but then when we start giving solutions, they're completely off in the distance with their solutions. They're just not actually ever addressing the root of the cause of things. That's what I would say. That's as a broad answer, right? But, but for sure, he's great at pointing out things.
I think Mr. Trudeau answered his questions fairly well for the ones that I watched. I do wish that, as we said earlier, I wish he was more hand over fist with some of his policies.
For Trudeau?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
For Trudeau.
Yeah,
because
Trudeau is on the full defense here for sure. It's all about what he's
100%.
been able to do and not able to do.
100%. And like Mr. O'Toole said, if you fuck up or if you fail, you have to take accountability for that. 100%.
Yep.
You can't say, oh,
Conservatives were in power for whatever years before this.
yeah,
blah, blah,
yeah.
blah.
You can't shift the blame because it's like, okay, yeah, the Conservatives were in power for however many years, but you had 6 years to get stuff done.
Yeah, we're 6 years in now.
Granted, you did have to deal with a pandemic, the first of its kind. But what stopped you from doing things for the last 5 years if you were to take that pandemic away?
Yep.
You still had 5 years to get stuff done. Sure, maybe
Yep.
the first 3 years you had to clean up from the Conservatives, right?
Mm-hmm.
I will concede that point. The last 2-3 years, what have you been doing?
Yeah, and I mean, who could forget? We shouldn't have a first past the post voting system still. That was one of the biggest failures. They lied right to our faces. We're going to have a proportional representation system, and what are we doing still? First past the post.
Past the post.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very democratic. No, for sure. Yeah, the Liberals have lots that needs answering to.
True. I think the Liberals need some accountability. And
I've actually enjoyed the minority government because they can't do things without cooperation.
Correct.
And in that way,
will
it's been
agree
good.
with that. But yeah, I do. I guess, like I said, my biggest issue that I've had with the NDP so far is, it feels like more so attacks than it does solution answers.
Exactly. That's my. Yep. You're bang on with that one.
And I feel like that's a problem because I feel like Jagmeet has in his platform. I feel like he has the solution. He has the solutions.
Yep.
I think he needs to elaborate on them.
Yeah, I agree. You need to show what you're going to do different and what you're even proposing, How many people come into these debates not knowing their policies,
Oh, so many people.
Yeah.
So many. I've looked at the NDP platform just because I plan on voting NDP and that was the platform that I looked at. I haven't looked at the other ones myself.
Yep.
Right? But that's because when I read the NDP platform, I was like, this ticks 9 out of my 10 boxes.
Yep, and the Liberals were the Liberals were really late in releasing their platform and stuff too.
They were
and everything.
really late.
This whole election's been fucked. It's been like this weird strategic game for everybody. So yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So I gotta take off. I gotta go to bed because I gotta get up at 6 a.m. and
No
I
worries.
don't want to be too late.
Yeah, I think the
and
debate's
I'm
almost
also-
over anyways, so I don't think you'll have too much catching up to do.
Yeah, I think it is almost over as well. But yeah, so that's going to be it for me, everyone. I hope everyone has a fantastic evening. I'll catch you all on Sunday. I don't know if you're going to be doing Skyblock with me on Sunday.
Yeah, Skyblock, and then we can look into looking at the platforms maybe if you want.
Yeah, 100%. I'm definitely down for that.
Cool.
Yeah, that's going to be it for me. Guys, make sure you vote. I feel like this election is, I would say, maybe more important than any of the ones that we had so far.
For sure. We want to.
We've
taken a step in the right direction with Liberals, but we can't stop there. We gotta, we gotta keep her moving.
Correct, and I feel like heading back to a conservative government is just going to hurt us.
It's a step either backwards or just stagnation, both of which are unacceptable.
I don't know about the Bloc Québécois Party or the Green Party, how that would positively or negatively affect us.
The Bloc don't plan on ever running federally. They only want to just sway Trudeau, and you can tell from his language, he just wants to sway whoever is in power to be have favorable Quebec policies essentially.
Yeah.
And then the Greens are kind of similar too, where they just want to sway direction because they know they can't control things. So in a situation where we have a minority government or a even God forbid a coalition government, which would be crazy, then their positions would be much more important in those cases. So
and that's kind of the issue I feel about with the NDP having his attack answers instead of solution answers, because with him throwing a lot of shade towards Trudeau, if Trudeau gets in power again, I don't find it very likely that they'll want to work with the NDP.
It's possible that a little bit of animosity. That's true. I see why Singh's doing it, because he's doing the lesser evil thing, right? And you can't do lesser evil without showing that the other sides are evil, right? It's kind of like 100%. One of those things of how else do you attack this? But yeah, I think I would much prefer the pragmatic approach. than this. Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe this does do better with voters. I'm not sure. I guess we'll find out.
Maybe it does. Maybe it does better with Western voters. Maybe we are just off ones where we're like, but
yeah, because if you already don't like Trudeau, then like you're looking for who's the alternative, right? So yeah,
and like if you voted Liberal last election and you don't like Trudeau now, your choices are Conservative, NDP.
That's pretty much it.
Bloc, right?
Conservative and NDP are the ones that will like take power at the end of the day. It's one of those two.
So
you can still vote for the other ones.
I definitely see the merit in his approach. I just personally I feel like he would have more success in solution-based answers.
I agree. I would prefer that myself, for sure.
And that's all that I'm going to be saying about it tonight. But like I said, I hope everyone has a fantastic evening. I'll catch you all on Sunday. Enjoy the rest of the debate, Novus, and you'll have to let me know your final thoughts on it, and we'll talk about it on Sunday.
Hell yeah, sounds good, my dude.
All right, peace, Rini peoples.
Peace, Rini. Thanks for popping by.
Always.
Hell yeah. All right, let's continue this shit.
And even with our fully costed platform,
just I'm gonna go back a bit here, just so we can get a little bit of context. So we're at what are we at now? It doesn't tell me when I'm live. Oh no. Okay. Let's just go back. Pinch here.
To have people's backs every time I.
To you, only 4 months ago, you released a budget that was billed as a pandemic recovery program, a plan that had $101 billion of new spending. Since then, COVID numbers are up, growth numbers are down. Now you got a new plan that adds $78 billion of new spending, essentially rendering your last budget out of date. How do Canadians trust that these new massive spending promises will not just keep growing in another few months? And what do you say to the next generation who say, how are we going to pay for this?
Well, first of all, I made a promise during this pandemic to have people's backs. Every time I came out of my house early on in the pandemic to talk directly to Canadians, I told them I'd be there for you. And that's exactly what we've done. And it wasn't just being there for people because we're nice, although of course we are. It was being there because that is the best way to ensure a strong recovery. Now, yes, our budget showed our ambition for this country, including with $10 a day childcare that Mr. O'Toole is planning on ripping up. But we also shows a responsible fiscal track. And even with our fully costed platform that is even more ambitious on the fight against climate change, on housing, on support for people, the debt of our country as proportion of the GDP continues to decrease.
Yes or no? Is it important to have a plan to balance the budget because you don't have one? Yes or no?
It is important to stay fiscally responsible, and that's what we're doing. Our debt continues to decrease as a share of our GDP.
We got to move on.
Ms. Paul, to you now.
Kind of an answer.
You have not been clear if you support the need for vaccine passports or mandatory vaccines for federal workers or even mandatory vaccines for your own candidates. Given that the fourth wave is really a pandemic of the unvaccinated and threatening to overwhelm many healthcare systems, how do you justify not supporting the very measures that have proven to be most effective at increasing vaccination rates?
Evan, we just filmed the video today asking everyone to get vaccinated. We have been unequivocal in our support for vaccinations.
Yeah, Trudeau did pull the election hoping to gain a lot, and he just lost everything.
Well, again, this is
definitely
just a
lot more of a tight rope right now.
Policy gets put aside for partisan advantage because everyone on this stage understands that everyone who can be vaccinated should be vaccinated. We need to encourage people to do it. Vaccines saves lives. And every single person on the stage has also said that, of course, there are going to be people who are not able to get vaccinated for certain reasons, and we have to reasonably accommodate them. We will always be guided by the science. We will never put partisan concerns ahead of public health.
I don't completely mind that answer.
You promise a $60
there are
billion
people that we need to
increase in
consider that
healthcare
can't get
transfers
elections
over the
because
next
of
10 years, but
complications
according
and
to the
stuff.
independent parliamentary budget officer, it's actually only a transfer of $3.6 billion for the next 5 years, which is not much different than the status quo. But you also support private-public synergies, in your words. Can you specify here tonight exactly what kinds of private healthcare innovations you want to see more of? And if a province introduces more private healthcare, would you enforce the Canada Health Act by holding back any of your promised funding?
I 100% support our public and universal system. I've said it's paramount. And after COVID-19, we need to rebuild it. So we have the most substantive plan to do that. 6% increase per year stable, predictable, without conditions funding to partner with our provinces. We will respect them running and putting priorities to get wait times down, to give more choice, for universal public access. That's what we need. On top of that, Evan, we have a substantial commitment in mental health and treatment for addiction. There are going to be lingering aspects from this pandemic that we're going to do in addition.
But just
the provinces are in charge of their system. We will respect that. Public and universal elements need to be at the core of our system, and our investments.
Notice how he used the word universal instead of private. Private, bad word in Canada. We don't like that word here.
Hire those people.
Okay, just for time.
All right, we got to wrap you, Mr. O'Toole.
Mr. Blanchette, Quebecers relied on the federal government for life-saving vaccines and key programs like the CERB. And as you mentioned, the Canadian Armed Forces came in to save people in long-term care homes in the province of Quebec. Some believe this crisis has enforced the argument for a strong federation and undermines your fundamental argument of separatism. Given that, if the federal government, say, gives $1 billion for long-term care homes, which Quebec failed to protect, why should they not also enforce national standards?
I have still not heard from all those brilliant people all over the place and all over Canada what a Canadian can do that a Quebecer cannot do. In what way whatsoever would a Canadian norm be any better than a Quebec norm? I don't see that. And I'm not, I don't have this complex. I don't feel that I'm any lesser person than a Canadian because I'm a Quebecer.
Enforcing national standards. If you pay for something, should you be able to enforce it?
National norms or standards. And I would say that the Premier Legault
I'm Canadian, yes.
said no one is to be entirely trusted in this group of people.
Albertans
Some are
specifically.
worse than others. I think they recognize themselves. But even those who are a little bit less terrible need a watchdog because they're not entitled to a majority government. So, if Quebecers want, I will lead the watchdogs.
Okay. This is the open debate section. And I'll start with you, Mr. O'Toole, but everyone please jump in. Not all at once. The pandemic recovery is about the future
I'm leaning
path of
NDP
Canada.
for sure.
And all of the leaders here tonight
yeah, I'll
have
be
made
voting
promises
NDP.
that require historic levels of spending. But as you
So
all
jug
know,
meat.
politics is about hard choices. With some Canadians still in real need of support and other industries experiencing real labor shortages, what specific programs will stay and what will go in the next year, and who will pay for all of this? Mr. O'Toole.
That's a great question,
NDP is
Evan,
like a
because
flavor
we
of
didn't see
liberal.
the
It's
government
more left.
adapt to the changing crisis. What we supported, and we all worked together, the wage subsidy, the CERB, needed to be adapted as there were labor shortages in Quebec, as we can't find enough people for restaurants and service industries. We need to target the highly impacted sectors. That's what our plan, Canada's Recovery Plan, does. We get those service, tourism, restaurants back on their feet, get people working, and with keeping cases low, we can then wind down the other programs because we need to focus on work. We have a job boost that will actually incentivize the hiring of people that have been out of work for 10 months or more.
Mr. O'Toole, let Mr. Singh in.
Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Trudeau are jumping over each other about who's going to cut help to people first. I don't agree with that approach. I don't think it makes sense to say, I'm going to have people's back, but I'm going to cut as quickly as I can. I'm going to cut the help to people who need it as much as they can.
The Canada's workers benefit
We're the only
is
party right here clearly is going to say to you,
unacceptable.
you're not going to have to pay more.
If you're over the age
We're
of
not gonna cut any
65,
programs.
you
We're gonna
shouldn't have
ask
to
the
work.
44,
We're giving
excuse
working
me, sir, hold on a
Canadians
second.
$1.
We're going to ask the
Let Mr.
44
O'Toole
richest
respond.
billionaires
Mr. Singh,
pay their fair share
Mr.
for
Singh,
once.
I think
That's what
everyone
we're
can
going to do.
respond to that because this is the second time that Mr. Singh has said we're the only party where just us. Mr. Singh, you know that's
hold on, Mr.
no,
Singh.
unless you're trying to ghost me, you know that
you're
we
right, you're
also
right.
okay.
Sure,
so
the Greens
yes,
as well. That's
okay.
two
Thank
of us.
you. Thank
You're right,
you.
you're
All right,
Very
Mr.
good.
Trudeau, you're trying to get in.
Hell
Mr.
yeah.
Singh continues to pretend that it makes no difference whether there is a progressive government or a conservative, or progressive government or a conservative government. We know that
It's
it
either
makes
going to be a
huge
liberal
difference to
minority or a
families,
conservative
whether they
minority,
have $10
likely.
a day childcare, whether they have a government that has
But
their back, a
hopefully
government that
the
has a
NDP
plan
can
to
sneak.
move
The NDP
beyond
would
the
have to
Harper
like
targets
pull a fast
on
one, you
fighting
know.
climate change. Now, Mr. Singh may feel that
But
for the
Canadians are
NDP, it
very,
makes no
very
difference
dug
who
into their
forms government.
Canadian and
I
or their
know
conservative and
Canadian
liberal
families are
Mr. Blanchet,
federal
you
government,
haven't-
so
you
it's
haven't
hard
been
to
in
get
yet.
them to
Mr.
vote away
Blanchet.
from that.
Legislate subvention salariale.
Wage subsidy.
Wage subsidy. Did any of you three guys refund the wage subsidy that you received?
We
up
stopped
to
it in
about
March.
$3 million. That would be something, at least for the principal. After that, there's an important issue, labor shortage. They are promising jobs. They should be promising workers.
Yes.
We need people
Oh, really,
to work,
hey?
and that
It
raises
is
the
a busy
question
month.
of productivity. This is the most important issue, and some programs should be turned toward that issue.
Mr. O'Toole.
In this pandemic election that Mr.
I hope
Trudeau
Germany's
called
doing okay.
after everyone asked him not to, he says he doesn't worry about monetary policy and inflation. Now he's saying he doesn't ever intend to balance the budget. He's spending $424 million a day more than Canada's bringing in.
The question was, what programs will stay?
We need to wind down the support
We-
programs in a
I can
fair
respond
way
to that directly.
and get the country working
We
again.
have got to remember.
Thank you.
Have got to
Last minute of play, leaders. Last minute of play. Ms. Paul, 5 seconds to you. I'm coming to you, Ms. Paul.
Thank you. We have got to remember the pandemic is not over, and all over this country, people still need the benefits. They should be
SPD.
there until the pandemic is over.
I'm not sure which
And to the
parties those are.
people
I'll
of
have to check them
Canada,
out.
It is unfortunate we are in this election. You can see that there is a lot of work left to do. We need to get back to doing it in a more cooperative way.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Paul.
One of the
Mr. Singh,
specific
I see you,
programs-
Mr. Trudeau. Mr.
One of the
Singh.
specific programs, we demanded 22 times in Parliament for Mr. Trudeau to expand was paid sick leave. Because in this pandemic, people had
big
to make the
one.
impossible choice going into work sick or not being able to because they couldn't pay their bills. 22 times over 18 months, we demanded an expansion, and Mr. Trudeau said no to you and said no to your family.
No to you.
Actually expanding
Get
sick
fucked.
leave to 10 days of paid sick leave for federal industries. Now, in the election,
Yeah,
this
just
is
for
in
federal
contrast,
employees.
you
Everything
have
is always
seen
just for
tonight
federal
the
employees.
extreme differences between the
I hate that so
perspectives of
much.
these parties.
Leaders?
We need
Federal
Canadians
employees
to
aren't the
make
only
right
people
choice.
working in
Leaders,
Canada
that is it.
who get sick with
We're
COVID-19.
out of time. Evan, thank you. Leaders, thank you for your participation
that's
tonight.
it.
That's it for the English Language Leaders Debate. Voting day is September 20th. Get your ballots. Make sure you're registered. On behalf of the Leaders Debate Consortium, I want to thank the crew, the producers, everyone who made this happen. I'm Shachi Curl. Good night.
Good night, very much. Good night.
Oh, there it is. Is there more? Oh, they're probably gonna have some other shit. Yeah, that's fine. Very good. Oh. Okay. SPD is center left. CDU is center right. Oh, okay. So if the SPD has gained votes, that's good then, right? I mean, in my perspective, I don't know about what you think, but Germany was pretty much always ruled by CDU in the last years. Since Merkel is quitting, they don't have a leader now. The Greens basically lost all their momentum. Oh, that sucks. I mean, I'm assuming Greens are like far left, right? I don't know. I could be wrong. Our Greens are pretty left in Canada. They're not by any means like actual leftists though, like technically, because they're still capitalists, but they're definitely the farthest left for sure. The struggle is real. I'm Polish, so I mostly look at how they view Russia. Pro-Russia politicians are a problem. Yes. Yes, they are. Oh, Russia. Yeah, that could be difficult. Yeah, I bet you the politics of anywhere down in the Europe area, right? Must be a whole wild ride. I haven't really paid too much attention. I know I like globally, right? I've only heard things of like Brexit and stuff, right? But I'm not really too caught up on all the happenings. I also watched something about the rise of the right in Denmark, which was kind of interesting. It feels like that's kind of like a growing sentiment, kind of led by anti-immigration sentiments in especially the Scandinavian areas and stuff, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, that's pretty much my yeah, they're the rise of they're probably hyper focusing and making things to be a bigger deal than they probably are, right? Is that what? I don't know if I'm correct on that, but I'm assuming that they make it seem as though they have all this power when in reality they're kind of like fringe parties, I would assume. But we have something similar in Canada. They make everyone look more radical than people are. Well, I mean, the Rise Up video that I watched had the leader of their, I forget which party it was specifically. He was like going into public and burning the Quran, I think, if I'm pronouncing that correctly and stuff. It's pretty radical. Once when it comes to Italy, they showed the far right and the leaders the center right in the next clip, which has nothing to do with them. Oh, yeah, like it's just like misinformation. That's annoying. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where you can't believe things on face value, for sure. I definitely, for sure. We have our own pretty like crazy fucking right-wing party here in Canada called the People's Party of Canada. To some degree, it's almost like luckily they weren't able to make it onto the stage for the debate this year because they believe in like the like actually just the clownish shit. They believe like in like a globalist agenda that the elites like control everything, and that like, which, you know, like there's always like some merit to like these critiques, but they take them to the fucking extreme with the shit, right? Like of course like logically, if you have more money, you have more power, and politicians can be bought, and then you kind of go down that line of logic and you can like come to like pretty salient conclusions from that, but they just take it and fucking run with it. They think that like climate change isn't real and stuff too. It's fucking wild, right? Like they don't think it's man-made. They'll argue against that, and then they have like multicultural policies and stuff. Lots of fucking wild and shit. It's pretty, but they're fringe, so like it's never something to be underestimated. But for now, at least, it's not as bad. It's definitely a lot of people that are pissed though that he wasn't able to debate. So. And some growing shit, rising sentiment from that. Anyways, yeah, that whole tangent aside, I think that debate was definitely a lot more entertaining than yesterday's. We watched the French debate yesterday, and it was very, very tame, which, like, generally Canadian politics, I don't know if anyone keeps up with much Canadian politics, but it tends to be very civil, very professional feeling. Today was a little bit more spicy. Definitely, though, when you compare it to things like the U.S. and stuff, it's it's not very spicy at the end of the day. But yeah, I think this was a little bit better of a debate, a better showing for. I would say, like at the end of the day, I would say Blanchet came out strong in this debate, with a strong foot right off the bat. I think most of the leaders did a lot better job at peddling their positions and stuff. And convincing. I do wish, so let's see. Yeah, Blanchet started out strong with environmental issues. He's extremely strong on that, I would say. And just general level-headed answers, I would say is pretty good. But it definitely fails on addressing social issues within Quebec, because Quebec is largely nationalistic. They do have problems with policies that are what's the word? I think xenophobic would be the right word. It does border on that, right? And the Liberals haven't really addressed that being in power either and allowing it to happen. So that's an issue where he definitely largely fails here. But I think he came out probably the strongest at the end of it. He started out strong and then kind of came down as they started to talk more social issues. Trudeau did like a fairly good job at defending his positions. Of course, it was pretty much like a full defense for Trudeau. He's constantly talking about what they've achieved, what they're working on, trying to swim through the misinformation thrown at him. I think he did a fairly good job at that. Of course, I don't think Liberal policies are enough of a step in the right direction, like a large enough step to make differences that we need on things like climate and stuff. So at the end of the day, of course, I do disagree with that. But I think he did like fairly well being on the defensive. I don't think Aaron O'Toole like he probably came off pretty good to Conservatives, to be completely fair. He didn't really like talk too much of like the usual Conservative talking points and stuff. Like he focused a little bit on their budgets and stuff, which is usually like a thing, you know, you try and make the Liberals out to be fiscally reckless. Is a pretty common one, and he hit on all the common points there. It really didn't. It did feel like he just almost wasn't there in the debate to me, though, which was really interesting. You know, like I don't know if that's just my biased perspective or something. of course, most of the things that he said, I know a decent amount about, so I don't, like, I already know that there's problems with what he says as solutions. But to conservatives, these might sound like actual better solutions, so it's possible that he came out affirming a lot of them. I'm not sure if he would have swayed anybody. Jug meat, I was hoping for it to be a little bit stronger of a approach from Jugmeat today, and I felt like, I guess in a way he was stronger, but it felt like he was focusing more on attacks and stuff for sure, like we'd mentioned with the 13 Army earlier. And I personally don't like that very much. It's possible that might actually sit better with voters, though. You know, if people are feeling really uneasy about Trudeau, then that might actually be effective at stealing votes. So who knows? Maybe that is the way to go about it. I would have preferred that he focused on solid, concrete policy answers with his answers for sure. And yeah, so I would say that. Otherwise, I did. Once again, this is probably like a little bit of a bias, but I did feel like he had a little bit more presence. I feel like him and Trudeau felt about equal to me, I would say. Pretty on par. He made some pretty good statements against Trudeau and about where Trudeau falls short, which is pretty huge because that's generally my perspective, right? Things like pharmacare, things like dental, the environment and stuff, right? Saying you're going to reduce emissions and then continuing or increasing, right? All of these points are pretty great. But yeah, a lot of his attacks a lot of his points were framed from like an attacking perspective. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how that will actually turn out for voters and stuff. It'll be interesting to see. And then the last leader, I believe, is that I hadn't talked about yet was Anna Paul. And overall, I do like her approach to it. Trying to get things to be nonpartisan, I think, is absolutely the best approach. So large focus on that, I don't mind. She had a lot of in-poll talking points, which I'm not a huge fan of. She raises good points that we need more representation and stuff. But I don't know how well that sits with voters and stuff, focusing on that. It's possible that like the extreme like people who like are extreme feminists and stuff might like really like that, and that's cool. I just don't know how reasonable of an approach this is, because I don't think it actually addresses like the major the roots of these problems and stuff. We're kind of just like talking about like it's kind of the whole like oh, we should have a female president because we need a female president. Of course, in Canada we have prime ministers, right? Because diversity, right? And like you're kind of right. Like I mean, we should, but does that actually address the reason why we don't? I don't think so. No. So I don't really like that as much. But yeah, otherwise, I think her sentiment and a lot of her policies are really great for sure. Overall, I think, yeah, I don't know. I think that she did probably fairly about the same as Trudeau and Singh in that respect, really. I think there's good things about all of the members and who are debating, and you really just kind of have to pick which policies are important to you and kind of vote on those, right? Figure out which ones are the most important to you and vote accordingly. So definitely, we will be doing another stream on Sunday, it sounds like, and we will go over the policies. So for anyone who hasn't had the time to or whatever, we'll break them all down. I'm going to try and be as nonpartisan about it as possible, and go through all of it. Of course, now I have a left-leaning bias, so of course I'm going to be coming at this from a left-leaning approach. But if you're interested in checking it out and seeing my reasoning and everything, I'd like to lay it all out for you guys. Then I'd be happy to explain all of that and everything. Maybe chat up with some of you guys if you guys disagree and stuff. That'd be cool. So yeah, we'll be having conversations on Sunday about that. I'll try and find a platform comparer, and we'll go through all the policy issues hopefully that way and make it a little bit more streamlined and easy to understand. Really, I want to make this pretty easy to understand for you guys. Make sure you guys register to vote if you're Canadian. The election's coming up on the 20th. We have advanced, so 20th we go to the polls, right? But we have advanced voting days starting tomorrow. We got 4 days in a row of advanced voting days. So, oh my God, you skip all the lines. It's amazing. I've done it before, guys. 200% do it up. You want to make sure you're registered. You can go there, you can register on the spot, or you can register online before Tuesday the 14th, and to pre-register. If you have been registered and ever voted before, you would have gotten, and check your mail, a piece of paper that looks like this in the mail. Here, I'll you know what, switch it over here. Piece of paper that looks like this in the mail. I don't know if that's I probably can't get it to focus very well, but yeah, it looks like that. and I was just covering my information there, my address and stuff. So it has your address, blah, blah, blah. On the back, it tells you your riding. It tells you the election day. It tells you the advanced voting days, which, like I said, the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. It tells you where to vote. And then you can vote by mail also. You have to vote by mail before Tuesday, September 14th at 6 p.m. And otherwise, for more information for voting options, you can visit elections.ca. So make sure you guys all get that shit figured out. And yeah, get to the polls and stuff. We'll be going through, like I said, on Sunday. So what's today? Is today Thursday? So I guess we'll be going through the policies and stuff after, because Friday is the 10th, 11th, 12th. Okay, so we're going through on the 12th, the policies and stuff. So then you'd have one last advanced voting day to vote if you haven't had a chance to check out the policies and stuff until we do it on stream. But yeah, otherwise try and check it out yourself, you guys, for sure. We're going through that on stream on Sunday. And yeah, thanks for popping by, everybody. And yeah, so that's pretty much all I have to say, I think, about that. What do you think about the 3Cs initiative? What's the 3Cs initiative? I'm not sure. 1 second. I'll see if I can figure it out. Three C's initiative is simply the 3Cs. Okay, so this is a European thing. Is a forum of 12 states in the European Union running along a north-south axis of the Baltic Sea to the Adriatic, Black Seas, Central and Eastern Europe. The initiative aims to create regional dialogue on questions affecting the member states. I mean, that sounds good. Sounds like communication, right? The 12 3Cs countries, over 29% of the European Union's territory, armed to 25% of the European Union's inhabitants. The 3Cs initiative, which was influenced by the Polish intermarium concept, was launched in 2015 by Polish president. Okay, so you're from Poland, I think you said, right? So this sounds like something that you guys are pretty into. First summit, the initiatives for summit held in Croatia, 2016, ended with a declaration of economic cooperation in energy and transport and communications infrastructures. Unity and cohesion. I love, if it's unity and cohesion, fucking amazing, dude. That's the great shit. The hardest part about like left or about right-leaning stuff, especially in Canada, I know, is that we are like a lot of right-leaning politicians would rather be really aggressive and obfuscational. I fucking hate that shit so much. Living in Alberta, we are constantly, like, our premier is constantly just attacking the federal government, not wanting to cooperate. We currently don't have a plan for $10 a day childcare because he just needs to villainize our federal government instead of sitting down and making a deal. So yeah, if this is unity and stuff, then I'm fucking all for it, like, right off the bat, for sure. It sounds good, right? I mean, maybe there's some bad things about it, but so far, from what I can tell, it seems great. Oh, they had Donald Trump participate? Intriguing. It's pretty vague, this article that I'm reading about it, but infrastructure, pipelines. Yeah, I don't know. It's not really giving me like a lot of like super details here. But I mean, if the goal is cooperation stuff and unity and they're doing well on that front, then I would say for sure. I mean, at least that seems good. But I can't give like a hard stance on it without knowing like other details for sure. Cool. So yeah, anyways, I guess that'll be wrapping it up for stream today. Thanks for popping by, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. As always, the debates are kind of a lot more for show. It can help some people, I think, who are a little bit more on the fence and stuff. But I really implore you guys to check out policies and see what aligns with you the best. We'll be doing that, like I said, once again on Sunday. And yeah, thanks for popping by. It's been great. And I will see you guys on Sunday. We stream usually at like 6 o'clock p.m. So from our time. Our time is Mountain Time. So something similar to today's stream started like an hour later than that. So yeah, hope to see you guys back then. And yeah, have a good one.